What's up, my wizards? It's Dev. Mtg, we like it a magic, and you read the title right. That maniac is at it again. We are here once more today to rate every single card in Throne of Eldraine for sealed play from 1 to 5 for you, so you'll be ready for your pre-release. We're going to do this for your listening pleasure. Last time it took like 2 hours. We're going to try to do this a little bit more succinctly this time, but still give you all the information that you need. Now, I got to keep this intro short because we obviously have a lot to talk about, but just remember, if you would please, before we really jump into the pool here, to just like the video, reward the grind, because this is quite the grind. And if you really like me, sub to the channel and hit up the Patreon link in the description, because if you just pledge $1 a month to the channel, you can help pick what Throne of Eldraine decks you want to see first this season. Pitch over, let's get into this thing. Alright, so over here on my thick spoiler, we're going to look at the white cards first, going in order of the color pie: white, blue, black, red, green, so forth and so on. Now, before I really go into Harmonious Archon here and kick things off, let me just remind you gently, I hope you remember as much as you can, that these ratings are for sealed play and sealed play alone. That's not limited, by the way. Draft is a much different format from sealed, where you have a lot more control over the deck that you're building. This isn't constructed in any way, Commander, Modern, Standard, none of that. Just sealed rankings from 1 to 5. So, let's get in here. Let's talk about Harmonious Archon, one of the biggest bombs in the entire set. 6 mana for 10 total power across 3 creatures, and making sure that you control the size of other creatures as the game goes on is actually a huge deal, even at that kind of rate, because 6 mana isn't as much in sealed as it is in some other formats. And of course, if you can augment your creature's power with things like Circle of Loyalty, you see that on your screen right now, or any other Anthem effects, then you just basically win the game by virtue of having way bigger creatures than your opponent. Even if you're only, a point or two of power bigger than your opponent's creatures, you still got 4/4s and 5/5s. They only have 3/3s. So the card is good for all kinds of reasons, and it is the definition of a limited bomb. Your opponent has to basically have at least 3 different removal spells to really deal with it, or a sweeper, and this set kind of lacks those in any real volume. So I'll start off these ratings by giving Harmonious Archon a 4.5. That is one of the best ratings you could possibly get, but it is one of the biggest bombs in the set as well. But so is Realm Cloak Giant, the card just to its right. This is, of course, 7 mana for a 7/7 Vigilance, which is a lot to get to. In sealed even, 7 mana is far different from 6 mana, because the difference between 6 and 7 mana is often 2, 3, sometimes 4 turns. You're not going to curve out the way you want to from 5 to 7. So as far as the creature half of this, you can play it in the very, very late game. It'll very often be the biggest thing on the board, but mostly we're looking at the sorcery half of this, because this is one of the very, very few sweepers in the entire format of sealed here. But of course, this too is at the mythic rarity, so you're not going to see too much of it. That said, this is the very definition of a bomb, and I'll give this one the top rating. Not too many cards are going to get this in this set, even though this is a set full of power, but obviously, since we're going through the mythics first, it's going to be a little bit lopsided in terms of scoring, and this is probably one of the most desirable mythics in the entire set for sealed play, so we'll go ahead and give it a 5. Going to be tough to beat a card like Giant. Circle of Loyalty, a little bit different though. This doesn't necessarily require that you have knights to play it, but it does kind of require that you have legendary spells and to get the absolute most juice out of it, and that's going to be tough. Now, as far as knights, this is where I get to bring in my first fun little fast fact. There are a ton of knights in this set, as you may have noticed, but if you want exact numbers, there are 35 different knights at common and uncommon, and 15 different knight payoffs at common and uncommon. This isn't one of them, this one's mythic rare, but just in case you do get it, it's not going to be too hard, even in the sealed environment, to get enough knights to really cast this for almost nothing. But once it's in play, it's going to do all the work anyway. All of your creatures, regardless of creature type, are going to get a bonus, and you can just pump out creatures, so it's a factory too. So this is about as good as it gets in sealed, even for this mana cost. But of course, if you get it down for 4 or 5 mana, it's that much better. I'll give this one a 3. It's not as good, well, we'll say 3.5, excuse me. It's not quite as good as the first 2 cards that we've covered by any stretch of the imagination, but 3.5 is still a very, very playable card. But this one requires that you have creatures, and requires a huge mana investment if it wants to make its own creatures. So even though it's a very strong card, it's not as strong, again, by any stretch, as the last couple of cards that we've covered. Ziggy is all up on me trying to get in here. Hey, Bubba. But anyway, let's move on to Acclaimed contender. This is 3 mana, 2 and a white for a 3/3 human knight, and it doesn't necessarily need knights to work. You know, you can get a knight with this, an equipment, a legendary artifact, an aura, and there are a lot of these in the set. Like I've already said, 35 knights at the lower rarities alone, plus some at rare and mythic, but there's also 13 different enchantments. What is it? 6 different equipments in this set, and some of those enchantments are RRs. You can't grab every enchantment with it, but there are 6 different equipments at the lower rarities. So it's, again, even in sealed, not going to be too hard to enable this, and it's a 3 mana 3/3 in and of itself. So I'll give this one a solid 3.5 too. This one isn't as powerful on its face as a card like Circle of Loyalty, but it's such a bread and butter role player card, and at a lower rarity, even though it's still not exactly likely that you'll see it, but much more likely than a card like Circle. I'll give it a 3.5 because I think it's going to form the backbone of some Knights decks in the limited environment at large, but sealed as well. This is one of those cards that lets you, enable Knights. At the higher rarities. There are plenty at the lower rarities in and of themselves, but this is one of the better cards at higher rarity that enables Knights. It's much more than just a Militia Bugler. But moving on to Charming Prince. This is 2 mana for 1 and a white for a 2/2, and it has 3 modes on it like a charm. You get it, Charming Prince. It's very cute, but all 3 of these modes are really, really good and sealed, and honestly, we played 2 mana 2/2s in that format anyway, just to fill our curve out, so I'm going to go ahead and give this a solid 3, at the very least, if not a 3.5. Because you're going to have some use for all of these effects the moment that you play this, whether it's turn 2 or even very, very late in the game. This is going to do some work for you, whether it's gain some life back off of an attack step, help you repeat and enter the battlefield trigger, scry 2 to dig into your bomb. It just does everything that you want. So, love this card, and it's at least a 3. Another one of those like really solid, rare, role players that you're going to see every now and again. But Giant Killer, as we move down here a little bit, is one of my favorite white cards in the entire set. I hate that it's rare, but it kind of has to be because it's such a balls out card in sealed, and it's just 1 mana for the 1/2 that taps down a creature, and these tappers are playable in sealed already, but this can also destroy a creature and then still come down later to tap something, so you've effectively neutralized 2 creatures in sealed. So this is actually pretty effective removal in terms of cost and just function in general, and I'll give this card a solid 4 at least. I was really digging in my heels thinking about a 4.5 there, but at least a 4. This card is absolutely insane in this format, and it might actually see some standard format play too, and it's obviously good in draft as well, but in terms of sealed, it is the ideal format for a card like this, and it will perform at its best in sealed and at your pre-release. So Giant Killer is an absolutely ridiculous card you need to look out for. Probably better than you think, but Happily Ever After is worse than you think, no matter how bad you think it is. This card gets a 0.0. You're never going to hit this in sealed. If you do, then it's going to go viral. It's just going to be almost impossible, and I think it's a fool's errand to even try. But hey, if you're the one person that does it, I'm very happy for you, and you might live happily ever after. But I'm still going to give this card a 0.0. It is the definition of a bad sealed card. It's a pretty bad standard card, so you're never going to hit it in sealed. Hushbringer, however, is playable, even if your opponent doesn't have any enter the battlefield triggers or dying triggers whatsoever. It's still a 2 mana 1/2 flying with lifelink, relevant keywords, especially in a format like sealed. So I'm going to go ahead and give this card a 3 as well. I really, really like this thing, and I think you'll play it in pretty much every sealed deck. 3 seems like it sounds like an average score, but 3 is actually a very playable card. Matter of fact, very playable cards start at about a 2.5. So I'm going to bring this up 1 grade from there, give it a solid 3, because it's not going to be the best card in any sealed deck, but it will be a solid role player, and it will keep your opponent off of some ETB triggers or dying triggers here and there. It will do its job, but mostly you just kind of want the flying lifelink body at a cheap cost. It's fine for that. So even though this probably just looks like a 2 in terms of body for the cost, the ability to sometimes shut something down is actually really important. I'll bring this down to a 2.5. We'll call it that. Linden, the Steadfast Queen, a little bit difficult to cast, but you are trying to trigger like Adamant in this format, and I imagine that a lot of decks will be heavy 1 color and then a splash another color. You could go 3 colors in this format, but I think it's probably going to be more rewarding at large to just try and go into the strongest card you have in 1 color and splash a second. That said, you probably could cast Linden on turn 4 in a lot of sealed decks, but you'll very likely not get many of these legends on turn 3 unless your deck is 100% monocolored, which is a pretty difficult thing to pull off in Sealed. There's also the fact that there's not a ton of, like, whenever you gain life things in this set. There's a couple of things, yes, but not too many to actually make a combo engine out of this that's, like, really worth talking about. And yeah, gaining life is great, but in Sealed, it's not necessarily the most important thing that you can be prioritizing. The best thing about this is the body for the cost with a keyword, but it's a very prohibitive mana cost to actually hit with any expedience. So I'm going to go ahead and give this a solid 2.5 as well. I want to play the card, but I'm not going to play it every time. Worthy Knight. This is an amazing Knight enabler. Again, 35 Knights at lower rarity, plus some at higher rarities too. So even in a format like Sealed where you have less control over your deck, it's going to be pretty easy to get a Knight or two out of this, over the course of a game. And again, it's a 2-mana 2/2 to begin with, so it's just a ridiculous card. I'll give this a solid 3. You play this pretty much every time that you see it. Now, moving on to All That Glitters, this is actually a nice little aura. I don't usually like auras in Limited, but as I said, there are 13 enchantments at lower rarities in this set, and 32 artifacts at lower rarities in this set. Put that together, that is 45 things at common and uncommon that can help enable this, and that does make you think. There's not really any good creature targets for this card, though. Not a whole lot of hexproof going on in this set. There is a creature that can go indestructible, but aside from that, there's really not much of, protection going on in this set. So I'm just a little wary of auras in general in Limited, so I'm not going to give this a very high score, but I will say, if you can enable it and you have, 8, 10 artifacts or enchantments in your deck, you could make a flying creature relatively big and smash in for the win every now and again, but it's a very dangerous proposition. I'll give this card a 1.5. 1.5 is about where playability starts, so we'll put it there. Archon of Absolution, amazing uncommon right here. Protection from white will matter in pretty much any environment, but Sealed as well. There are a lot of, players that play blue-white flyers and just your typical archetypes like Selesnya. There's going to be a lot of white in any Sealed environment, and this can come in to your main deck. It doesn't have to be sideboard or anything, because the rest of the text on it is pretty good against aggressive decks, and even if you're not up against an aggressive deck or a white deck, it's still snapping Drake stats. 4 mana for a 3/2 flyer is more than playable in the Sealed environment, and I really like the rarity on the card. I'll give this a solid 3. You're probably going to play it every time you see it. That's actually... yeah, we'll give it a 3. Pro-White, I think Pro-White does bring this up to a 3. You'll play it if you're in white. Deafening Silence, this is just sideboard chaff. We'll give it a 1/2 of a point, because that's what sideboard cards get, even though you're probably not even going to bring this in from the sideboard very often. This is very close to a 0. But anyway, Glass Casket is insanely playable removal that also helps out any sort of sideways artifact synergies that you might be working for. Like, let's say you do have All That Glitters in your deck, or another few cards that work off of artifacts. Glass Casket's there for you. So, permanent on the battlefield, artifact type, that's going to help sometimes, and it's just super playable removal. I'll give this a 3.5. This is a card you'll be more than happy to play all the time, but it's nowhere near bomb territory, obviously. It's just fair removal. Mysterious Pathlighter, really good card right here. 3 mana for a 2/2. Flying, that's Windrake stats. You're going to play that in your Sealed deck pretty much every time. But this has a nice little payoff for adventures. Now, there are 30 total adventure cards at common and uncommon, and that, again, is just enough in Sealed that you're likely to be able to get 2, 3 procs off of this in a given game of Sealed, and if you can get more than that, the card is just absolute gravy. I mean, the fact that this is a 3 mana 2/2 is good enough in and of itself, but if this can, amount to 3 or 4 given power for your 3 mana investment in a game, it's just going to be one of the best cards in your deck. So, a Metallic Mimic for all your adventure creatures, that's very, very good. And you're going to play the card regardless of if you have like adventure stuff most of the time anyway, because you want a competitively costed flyer in Sealed. So I'll give this too a 3. It does have to be enabled a little bit, but you're going to play it one way or the other. So, I mean, I can't really fuss about it too much. But on to Rally for the Throne here. This is 3 mana as well for an instant that creates 2 human creature tokens, and if you go Adamant, you gain life. I'm not really caring too much about the Adamant on this, but I do like instant speed 2 human tokens. Now, there are some things in the set that don't like when you have humans out, some non-human payoff cards, but I don't think there's too many of those. Honestly, I think there's like 6 to 10 of those. So, sometimes this won't work very well with those random cards, but for the most part, 3 mana at instant speed for 2 guys is a playable card, and I'll give this a 2. Righteousness is actually much worse than you think it is. This is just a decent decent combat trick, but you can't even like run in your guys and then play it. You have to block your opponent's creatures. It's best against aggressive decks. So I'm really just going to give this a 1. It's not as good as you might think it is, and it never has been. It's been around since the very beginning, and it's just never been the card people want it to be. But let's move on to Shepherd of the Flock here. 2-mana 3/1. Pretty decent stats in and of itself, but the instant half on this is really, really good for saving your guys. That's nice. Or again, repeating enter the battlefield triggers is always good too. So just the body on this is playable enough, and I really like the adventure half because you're going to get some mileage out of it. We'll give this card a 2.5. Very solid playable here. That's going to be a great role player in most of your white decks. You don't even really have to enable it. You're going to want to save your guys from removal. This is just a huge sort of card advantage piece where if you can save your guy from getting, bolted or whatever removal spell, and then get basically your creature back and another creature out of it, you've kind of 2-for-1'd your opponents. So again, insanely playable card. Play Shepherd of the Flock. Sir Aelin, the Lion's Claw, 5-mana 4/4 first strike, good enough stats on its own, and being able to pump all your creatures when it attacks in, really, really good. That's a great anthem effect. So I like a lot about this, and I don't really think it does much outside of the sealed environment. But in sealed, this is very near bomb territory. I'll give this card a 3.5. This is a fantastic uncommon. Venerable Knight, this is a role player. Just a 1-mana 2/1 is good enough. And again, with so many knights, 35 at lower rarity, it's not going to be too hard to find a place for this point of power and toughness to go. It's even better than most 2/1, Savannah Lions-y type creatures. So I'm going to go ahead and give this one a 2. It sounds like a low score, but I don't really like 1-drops in limited that much. But if you're in an aggressive deck or a deck that's looking for a lot of night payoffs, you will play this card. And 2 is a solid playable, so we'll give it a 2 to it. Gotta finish that sentence someday. But anyway, let's move on to Ardenvale Paladin. A 4-mana 2/5 is not the worst stat line in the world, but a 4-mana 3/6 is really, really good for sealed play. So I would put this in my deck if I could, almost guarantee the adamant payoff. But honestly, 5 toughness in sealed is a huge deal some of the time, and a bigger deal than you might think it is. Let me just put it that way. It's just 5 toughness is sort of the starting point for a lot of just really solid creatures throughout the history of the sealed environment. So I have to rate this a little bit higher than I want to, honestly, especially considering, again, you get the 4-mana 3/6. It's just a ridiculous card on stats alone in that environment. 6 toughness. It's tough, really tough to beat in this environment specifically. So I'll give this card a 2. I think it's definitely a solid bread and butter card. Ardenvale Tactician, very good magic card right here, y'all. This is 3 mana for a 2/3 flying. Again, playable stat line, even though it's a little bit tough to play. You're going to probably be seeing a lot of monocolored light decks, mostly this color, splash of another color. So shouldn't be too tough to get in a lot of your white limited decks. And the instant half on this Dizzying Swoop is just good. It's just a fine little combat trick, not necessarily combat, but you tap down 2 creatures to either make sure they can't attack you, or you can get through the line in your aggressive limited deck by tapping down some guys. So I love the multiple uses on this. And I love the body just in general. Again, 3-mana 2/3 flying is very solid. So I'll give this card a 2.5. I think it's one of the better white commons in the entire set. Let's move on to Bartered Cow. Many have mistaken this for Battered Cow because he kind of looks battered there. But anyway, a 4-mana 3/3 is Hill Giant stats. Not much to write home about, but at least somewhat playable and sealed. And sometimes you'll get a food token off of it, It'll die in combat, trade with a guy, and then you'll get a food token somewhat winning that exchange. So I think this is at least somewhat playable. We'll give it a 1.5. Beloved Princess is not necessarily the kind of 1-drop that I really like, but I do like the idea of putting an all that glitters on this if you have a few different artifacts or enchantments, making it really big. I mean, there's some ideas here, but at the end of the day, it's a 1-mana 1/1, and even though the lifelink and the other ancillary ability on it are somewhat attractive eye candy, I'm still just going to give this a 1. It'll go in your deck every now and again. Fairy Godmother looks much more attractive. Just a 1-mana 1/1 flying. The evasion is very important on pretty much any creature that has flying, no matter how low it's costed. And the sorcery half on this, even though it can't be used as a combat trick, is still a nice little thing to have. Again, in your aggressive limited decks, this is right there with Ardenvale Tactician and making sure that you can get damage through, get big creatures through, and I really like that about the card. It's just got a lot of different uses, and a lot of these adventure cards, especially in white, are just really, really aggressive, meant to streamline these sort of creature decks to where these creatures or at least decently statted. You know, with Ardent Veil Tactician, 3 mana, 2/3 flying. This is at least a 1 mana, 1/1 flying. Not the best thing in the world in sealed, but you'd play that one way or the other, especially if you're looking to play aggressively and get in damage in your sealed deck. You might play that 1 mana, 1/1 flying, so why not tack on another ability that gets through a creature for a buttload of damage, you know, all at one time. I really, really like this. And, yeah, I can't really score it super highly, but I will give this a 2. You know, I don't want to play it every day, but it will show up in a frightening amount of sealed decks, mostly because that that adventure is so good. I wish it was instant speed, but, you know, wish in one hand, boop in the other, see which one fills up first. Flutterfox is 2 mana for a 2/2 fax, and it's pretty easy to control an artifact or enchantment, as said. 45 of those such cards at the lower rarities. Make sure that this is going to have flying a lot of the time, and that means that it's actually a really, really solid card in common, you know? This 2 mana for a 2/2 flying some of the time is probably worth at least a 1.5, if not a 2. Fortifying Provisions doesn't look super good to me. You do get a food token when it ETBs, so it doesn't do nothing. But I said this during spoiler season, I'll say it again. This one's tough to evaluate for sealed specifically, but it looks good. If it's going to be good in any format, it's going to be good in sealed. Because a lot of the sealed and really limited environment at large is focused on, you know, power and toughness of creatures on the lower end of the curve. You know, you want your 2 mana creatures to have, you know, enough power to take down 3 toughness creatures. You want your, you know, 3 mana creatures if need be. You want your 3 mana creatures to not be able to be taken out by 2-drops and stuff. So, you know, just messing with that formula just a little bit can sometimes throw off the balance completely in a game of sealed. So I think this might be a little bit better than I want it to be, but I'm still not going to say it's a great Magic card. I'll give it a 1. Knight of the Keep, 3 mana, 3/2. I don't really care for these too much in sealed. It's an aggressive stat line, but I was just saying you don't want to play 3 mana creatures that die to 2-drops, and you're asking for it if you play a 3 mana 3/2. So I'll give this card a 1 as well. Lonesome Unicorn, I really like as a Magic card, and I think it's actually really good in sealed too. A 5 mana 3/3 Vigilance. Not the best stat line, but when it comes stapled to a 3 mana 2/2 Vigilance, it looks a lot better. 2 creatures on 1 card is pretty much always going to be good, especially when you get 5/5 worth of stats for your investment. I think this isn't one of the best cards in white, but I do think it's really, really good looking for a common. And again, I'm going to use this phrase a few times during this video. Nice bread and butter card for sealed play. So I'll give this one a 2. Solid playable right there. Outflank, not as good as you probably think it is, honestly. Yeah, it's instant speed, and a lot of times it's probably going to add up to 2 or 3 damage, but it's restricted specifically to attacking or blocking creatures, so the creature that you're targeting has to be involved in combat. And again, you've got to have creatures out, which doesn't necessarily, you know, it's not always guaranteed in a game of sealed. So it is removal, so you'll probably end up playing it, especially in very aggressive decks that have a high creature count, but I really can't give this more than a 2. Again, solid playable for just from the benefit of being removal. You got to give it a 2, but this is a little bit harder to enable than it might look like. Prize Griffin, decent stats for what you're actually getting here. 5 mana 3/4 flying, not much to write home about, but still solid playable limited card. We'll give it a 2. Silver Flame Ritual, 4 mana for this sorcery here that puts a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. But of course, you have Adamant, they can gain Vigilance until end of turn. This looks okay, but I'm not sure that it's necessarily the stall breaker that you want it to be, and it requires that you have a bunch of creatures out. It's nowhere near the overrun effect that you're looking for on cards like this, so I'll just give this like a 1.5. This is another one that I think you might be tricked into playing, but it's actually not as good as you think. Silver Flame Squire, on the other hand, I'm very excited to play. A 2 mana 2/1, again, not the best rate in the world, but a playable curve filler in limited. And as far as the instant half on this, it's a little overcosted for a combat trick, but I'll probably play a couple of copies of this if I pick them up in my limited deck. I think this one might be one of the best role-playing commons in white in aggressive decks in this set, but obviously, if you haven't been able to tell by now, white is very aggressive this time around, so it wants stuff like this, and even though I'm not sure that it wants to hold up 3 mana for a combat trick, it is nice to have this kind of flexibility on a card. I'll give it a 2. Shining Armor, pretty decent, you know? It's not too hard to enable this and attach it to a knight for free, but At the same time, I don't really like equipments like this that don't infer a power bonus whatsoever. If you can save one of your guys from either red removal or save it in combat with this card, then I think it has paid its due, but I'm not going to be sure that it's, worth a deck slot in most decks. The aggressive decks that want this, it's not a very aggressive card, but if you can basically have it function like a dive down or a negate or something like that, then it's probably worth at least one slot in your aggressive Knights-oriented deck, provided that you can actually get that payoff. So I'll give this card a 1.5. I think it might show up every now and again. Trapped in the Tower is a very desirable removal. In fact, it might be the best removal in white this time around. It's actually fantastic. Even though some of the most important creatures in Sealed especially are flying creatures. So you're not going to be able to shut down the majority of your opponent's most important creatures with this, especially like their big bomb, flying or rare or mythic that has flying. You're going to have trouble shutting it down with this, but this is still premium removal that you'll play pretty much every copy of in your Sealed deck. We'll give it a 3. True Love's Kiss is sideboard tech. We'll give it a 0.5 point. And Youthful Knight, 2 mana for a 2/1. Again, not the best stat line, but you add First Strike and suddenly it's far more attractive. Most creatures at 2 mana are going to have at least 2 toughness, or 2 toughness at the most, a lot of the time. The majority of the time. And even a lot of creatures at 3 mana have 2 toughness. So this is going to take down stuff at 3 some of the time and not even trade up. Just kill the thing. Stay on the battlefield. I really, really like this card. I know that it looks really, really unassuming, but it does hit night payoffs and stuff like that. It's playable curve filler, and I think that First Strike is subtly one of the most impactful abilities you can have on a creature this low on the curve with a decent stat line. So I'll give Youthful Knight a 2. I think you're going to play it a lot of the time. But up next, let's go into Blue Velvet, starting with Brazen Borrower right here. You play this card. If you get it, it's a mythic, so you're probably not going to get it, but it's not quite a bomb, so I'm not going to give it like a 4, 4.5, anything like that, because you can't really call it a bomb. But it is an evasive creature that's aggressively statted on 1/2 with flash. That's nice. So you can play it as a combat trick to block a flyer, or you can just get through for a bunch of damage over the course of a couple of turns, But it's also pseudo removal, if nothing else. So I usually hesitate to call these bounce abilities removal, but oftentimes in games of Sealed, this sort of tempo amounts to removal. So, especially if you can play a bigger creature on the next turn than you bounced, which you often will if you play this in the first few turns, but anyway, I digress a little bit. We'll go ahead and give this card a 3.5, because it's one of the most solid playables in the entire set, but it's nowhere near bomb territory. Magic Mirror, kind of a bomb though. This is ridiculous card advantage if you can ever actually cast it, and that's where I think that the kind of its toughness to evaluate really enters, because I'm not really sure what I'm going to end up giving this card, but I hinge on just saying, a 2, because it's going to be very, very tough to cast in most situations, not only because of the prohibitive mana cost, in terms of color requirements, but, 9 mana, and let's say in Sealed, it's turn 8, and you have 3 to 4, Instants or Sorcerers in your graveyard. It still costs like 5 to cast and has very difficult color requirements, but even that seems like Christmas land. This is Sealed, where maybe you played a piece of removal in a combat trick or something, so it still costs like 7 mana. It's just, I'm not really sure about this one this time, y'all, and even though I might eat my words, I can't really give it much higher than a 2, because it's very specific. It's not going to work every time. It might rot in your hand a lot of the time too, so I think the upside, the fails, let me start with the fail case. The fail case is very likely on this, and also very bad. The success case is insane and will win you the game, but getting to that point is going to be very tough. So I'm going to just give it a 2, and it might even be lower than that. Imri, Lurker of the Loch, you have to have an awful lot of artifacts for this to actually be a decent card, but again, there are like, 32 artifacts at lower rarities in this set, so it's at least a possibility, but even then, it's not the best card in the world. This is much more of a constructed playable card than a limited playable card, so I'll give this a 2 as well. It's playable, but it's not going to do all the work in the world for you. That said, if it does draw, quote-unquote, draw 1 card per game, then it's probably doing pretty good work for you. So again, 2 solid playable, we'll do it. Fae of Wishes. This is actually neat. If my understanding is right about Sealed, then you can actually just grab a card from your sideboard, which is literally every other card that you open in those 6 packs. So this might actually be kind of neat in that capacity, but if nothing else, it's a 2 mana 1/4 flyer. Those are really good stats. Those are push stats for constructed all day, so it's definitely push stats for sealed. For sealed. I'll give this a 2 as well. Solid playable if nothing else, but probably a little bit more than that. Folio of Fancies, it's not great, but each player drawing X cards has the potential to be a bomb. That said, you're probably not going to get the mill win off of this, so I just can't really give it a very high score. We'll give it a 1.5, but the ability to just draw a buttload of cards in the late game might be okay, but of course you're letting your opponent do it too. Let's move on here to Gadwick the Wizened. This too, really difficult mana requirements in terms of the colors, but if you can cast this for like 5 mana, it's an unbelievable card. It's like a Mole Drifter, basically, 5 mana, draw 2, you get a 3/3 body in this case, and then you get a sort of removal ability, kind of. If you have instants, you can keep your opponent's creatures from attacking, but you just have regular spells and you just tap them down and get in for combat damage, so a lot of cool play on this card, and I will go ahead and give it a 3, even though, again, these color requirements are killing me, Smalls. I still think that if you just play like a 3/3 body and draw 2 cards for 5 mana, that is dangerously close to a bomb, so I'll give it a solid 3. That's more than solid, actually. Midnight Clock is another one that's kind of like Magic Mirror. Like, very late in the game, this might do the thing for you, and you just get, like, insane card advantage. But up to that point, you're just feeding it, and you're waiting forever for the clock to finally strike 12. So I'm not a huge fan of this, and I'll probably go ahead and give this like a 1 because, yeah, it might go crazy in a game of Sealed and win you the game by drawing you all the cards, but it just doesn't seem as likely as I want it to. So I will tentatively give this a 1, let's say 1.5, probably a 1. Let's say 1. Mirror Maid, on the other hand, really, really neat. Again, 45 total artifacts and enchantments at the lower rarities in this set, plus a few more at the higher rarities. So it's not going to be too tough to find a target for this, and especially if your opponent has a very nice card in their deck that you'd like to copy. This seems fine, but most of the time it's probably going to be dead in your sealed deck, so I'm just going to give this one a 0.5. I could see it being sometimes playable out of your sideboard, but unless you have something very specific to enable this, I don't like it. And even then, the chances that you draw both of them in the same game of Sealed are probably lower than you want them to be. So we'll give this a 0.5 point. Stolen by the Fae, ridiculous. The card is absolutely ridiculous bomb. You play this, every copy of it, if you actually get more than one copy somehow, you play them. The card is unbelievable. This is at least a 4 in my mind, because let's say that you pay 5 mana for this, return a 3 CMC creature to their hand and get 3 1/1 flyers. That's insane. That is really, really good. Board presence in Sealed, while also taking away from your opponent's board presence, creating tempo, all that good stuff. So, yeah, I'll give it a 4. This is a ridiculous card in Sealed. Stolen by the Fae you want to be looking for. Vantress Gargoyle, on the other hand, is not quite as good as it is in Constructed play, but it's still a playable card that if you can at least, block with it, then it's great in the early game, but it's going to be relatively tough to attack with this until very, very late. Even though it does help enable itself, it's still going to be kind of tough, so I'm just not a huge fan. Although I will say, you rip it off the top of your library on turn 10, it might be okay. And if you get it on turn 2 and it stays in play and you're actually able to tap it every turn, then maybe. But that's so many maybes. That's so many different situations where this has to be good. Just shoebox situations, I like to call them. So I'm just not sure how good the card actually is in Sealed. I'll give it a 1.5, although big flyers tend to be great. It's just a lot harder to enable, but in very long games of Sealed, this might be a super playable card, so actually I'll bump it up to a 2. Animating Fairy is one of the uncommons I am most excited about to play at the pre-release. 3 mana for a 2/2 flyer. Again, Windrake stats. You'll just play that. It's fine. That's worth it. But being able to make a non-creature artifact into, a 4/4, that's really good too. Again, 32 artifacts. Some of them are creatures, but there's about 20 or so artifacts in the set that aren't creatures, so it's relatively easy to enable this. I think I really, really like this card, because if you just look at it as like a 3 mana 4/4 that draws a Windrake, that's phenomenal. So I'm going to give this card a 3. I think it's much more than solid, and it's going to form the backbone of a lot of blue sealed decks. It just seems crazy to me to get 7 mana or 7 power worth of stats, for this cost, split up between a couple of turns. You get an evasive guy. It's just a really good card. But Fairy Vandal, on the other hand, moving on. This is the first of these, draw your second card each turn things, which I think there are like 6 of in total. So this looks like much more of a draft deck concept than a sealed deck concept. It's a lot harder to enable in sealed than it is in draft, but still, it's a 2 mana 1/2 flash flying. There are at least playable stats, and if it ever becomes a 2/3, it's definitely worth a slot in your deck, so I'll give the card a 2. Frogify is worth playing in most sealed decks, especially those without access to better colors, or at least colors that have better removal. So I'll probably go ahead and give this a 3. If they can somehow shake off the aura, then it's obviously bad, but for most intents and purposes, this is going to be very playable removal, so at least a 3 on this. Hypnotic Sprite, 2 mana 2/1 flying, again, that's pretty playable stats, but most of the spells that people are going to play, even in sealed, are going to be converted mana cost 3 or less. So this is still a playable counterspell for, again, all intents and purposes, so really like this card. I think it's got a shot in constructed play, but for sealed play specifically, sorry, my body really would like me to burp right now. But anyway, for sealed play specifically, I'll give this card a 2.5. I think it's much more than playable, and I really want to give it a 3. I think it's great. But into the story, this I think might be, again, one of the best uncommons in all of sealed play, not only in blue, but there's a chance this might be one of the best uncommons in sealed, period. 7 mana is never the rate that you want for this, but if your opponent does have a buttload of cards in their graveyard, drawing 4 at a 5 mana rate, or excuse me, a 4 mana rate, by the way, is just, that's absolutely crazy. Opportunity was a very important card, and what was it, like M14 sealed? It was the same sealed that you could play on Duels of the Planeswalkers 2014. So, and I played a lot of that sealed environment, and Opportunity is like the best card in that entire environment. So this kind of gives me, flashbacks, night terrors, and sweats, that it might be as good as Opportunity, but this might be a fast enough sealed environment that Opportunity's not a great card. So who knows? I probably want to give this a 2.5. I think I do. Sealed control decks will get to the point in the game where they can enable this for 4 mana, and at that point, it's an unbelievable play. So yeah, we'll do that. But Mystical Dispute is mostly sideboard tech, so we'll give it a 0.5 point. Overwhelmed Apprentice is very playable, just like Omen Speaker was very playable in every sealed environment it's ever been in. Really, really good card Omen Speaker is, and you know that by now, so Overwhelmed Apprentice, also great. I mean, it's half the cost of Omen Speaker, and sealed is one of these formats where your opponent will be the least likely to take advantage of the mill clause on this. Sometimes you mill cards in the graveyard, just giving them cards, but not necessarily in sealed as much as constructed formats, so you can just kind of wave off that part of it. 1 mana 1/2. I don't like 1-drops in sealed, but if they scry me to, get me to my bomb faster, get me to my lands the way I want to in the early game, and I'm very inclined to play it. And in fact, I'm probably as inclined or more inclined even to play this 1-drop than just about any other 1-drop in the sealed environment. I'll give this a 2.5, which 1-drops very rarely get in my book. But anyway, moving on to Sage of the Falls. A 5 mana 2/5, again, decent stats, but this can be a decent little looting engine for you in the course of some games, so I expect this to actually be, again, an important card in sealed. If not the best card in sealed, I do see this being sort of a spinal piece, or a piece of the spinal column, for a lot of blue decks in sealed. So I'll give this a 2.5 too. I think this is a very, very good Magic card. Sir Eleonora, is it Sir or Sire? Because they're both medieval words. Sire? I think it's Sir, though. Eleonora the Discerning. This looks really good to me. Now, in some games of sealed, you're not going to have like any cards in your hand, but even if you don't, you still get a 4 toughness thing that draws you a card, and it's difficult to kill, and has the chance to get bigger as the game goes on. So this might be one of the best threats that blue actually has access to, even though it doesn't have flying. Just the ability to draw a card is worth playing this card in sealed. So I'd play it every chance that I got, honestly. I'll give this thing like a 2.5, easy. But turn into a pumpkin, great in my book. Blink of an Eye was good in sealed, and it was good in constructed too. And this is basically a Blink of an Eye that you're always paying 4 mana for. But if you go adamant on it, you get a nice little tertiary bonus that's really good in control decks. You know, hold back the line, get some tempo, draw your card, zap an attacking creature back to their hand, and create some, you know, some life. So that's really good, especially if you have 6 open mana when you cast the spell. That's a really good spell. So I really expect this to be a role player in control decks, and even some other decks. You know, it's basically removal in no matter what deck you play it in some of the time. So I'll give this card a 2.5. Charm Sleep is just straight up removal, so I'll give it a 3. Even though it's not the best removal in the world, colored requirements to cast are a little bit difficult. I'll give removal a 3. So anyway, Corridor Monitor right here. This is 2 mana for a 1/4, which is, again, that's fine. I'll take those stats, and untapping a creature to give it like a pseudo vigilance is pretty cool. And there are a couple of little combos with this in sealed right now. So even though this isn't the best thing, again, I expect this to be a role player, if nothing else. So I'll give the card a 1.5. Solid playable, especially against aggressive decks. Didn't Say Please is my least favorite name for a counterspell ever, and it's a counterspell. So, you know, it gets like a 1.5 or 2. You know, it's fine. In control decks, you'll play every copy of this that you get, virtually at least. And, yeah, it's playable. So we'll give it a 2. Mantle of Tides. I actually don't mind this. I've seen a lot of, like, hate for this whole cycle of equipments, and I don't get it. I'll take, you know, free equips all day, even though it's going to be relatively tough to actually enable this. If you can't enable it even once and turn it into like a pseudo dive down, then it's going to, you know, basically counter a removal spell, and that's pretty good. And in the meantime, it gives at least a decent PT bonus to a creature for what you're actually paying for the card. So I actually don't think it's terrible, but the initial equip cost on it is relatively high if you can't enable it. So I'll just give the card a 1 for now, but I think it might surprise us. Merfolk's Secret Keeper, I don't really like it all in sealed. I mean, a 0/4 blocker for 1 mana is at least okay, but it really doesn't do anything outside of like hose aggressive decks, so I'll just give it, you know, a 0.5. Misford River Turtle is Mr. T. He's actually really, really cool. I like that he's kind of a take on these creatures that are usually white, and when they attack, they give something else flying. But this is just straight up unblockability, and he's got, you know, high enough toughness to survive most attacks. So the chance that you'll actually get these, you know, trigger 2 or 3 turns in a row is relatively high. So I do like this card. I think that it can, you know, really help you create a lot of damage if that's what you're trying to do in blue, but very often you're not, right? So I think that the applications are relatively minor, but every now and again this is going to just get a huge dude through no questions asked in like your Simic deck or something. So I'll probably go ahead and give this like a 2 because the stats are at least okay. And again, once in a while, you just win the game off of it. So might even be as high as a 2.5, but enabling it might be a little bit tougher than you think. Moonlit Scavengers. I hate how much this costs, but I do really like the body, and I really like the tempo a lot. And again, it's just not going to be too hard to enable the artifact or enchantment clause on it. If you don't, you've paid too much for your creature, but if you can, this kind of tempo is really desirable. I do worry that 6 mana is a little bit too late in the game to really, for this to be like good tempo, you know, like meaningful tempo. But if you're just looking to like get in with an attack step or something, this can be really good. Sometimes, you know, just returning like a 3/3 to their hand and then plopping down a 4/5 is basically removal, right? Like even if they play their guy, you still outclass it. So it's kind of removal in that case. So I do kind of like this thing, but I'm really wary of, you know, like including 2 or 3 copies. Probably just roll with the 1, and even then, it doesn't go in every deck that plays blue. So, you know, you have to have artifacts and enchantments that you actually want to play. So, I'm just going to give this thing like a 1.5 for now, but in decks that want it, it's like a 2. But Opt, you'll play it every time, but it's not like the best Magic card, so I'll just give it a 2.5. Queen of Ice, however, I think this is one of the best blue commons for sealed play, just period. Just look at all the stuff this card does, you know? Like, it's not removal on either half, but I like these freeze effects. I know that like a lot of players don't, or they don't think that they're like the most impactful thing, but if you're in a sort of aggressive deck, and I mean this is a creature, so if you're in a sort of aggressive deck that's trying to play a fair amount of creatures or a creature on curve every turn, then I do kind of like this. You know, you rip it off the top of your library in the late game, freeze those 2 guys down, get through for combat damage, and you don't even have to worry about them hitting you next turn. You know, there's no crackback. They don't untap. You know, you basically get 2 free untap stats without worrying about the 2 biggest creatures on their side of the battlefield. But if this is out, then you can attack in with it indiscriminately because your opponent doesn't want to tap down their guys. Or, you know, you can just hold it back on defense and dare your opponent to swing into it. Because, you know, even if it blocks and it dies or whatever, it's still going to freeze down their best creature for like 2 turns. There's just so much play on this card, and like all of it is not aggressively costed, but at least fairly costed. So I'm going to give this card a 3. Like, I really think it might be the best blue common, period. And I think a lot of people are underestimating it or overlooking it, you know, whichever word you want to go with. But Runaway Together is 2 mana for a bounce effect that also, like, requires you to have a creature out that you want to do something with. But at the same time, like, if you're using this as kind of a negate, you know, your opponent goes to remove one of your guys, you return it to your hand and also return one of their guys to their hand, that actually seems like really, really good to me. So I don't think the card is like the best removal piece in the set or even the best tempo piece in the set, and its applications are more narrow than it looks when you first read the card. I really hope it's more versatile than I'm pegging it, but honestly it looks a little bit more narrow to me. I'd say this is probably like a 1.5, but sometimes it's going to do really cool stuff for you. So let's move on to Steel Gaze Griffin. Man, we're already done with blue almost, but Steel Gaze Griffin is just fine. You know, 5 mana, 2/4 flying isn't the best stats in the world, but it's probably at least playable as curve filler if nothing else. You know, flying creature with 4 toughness, I'll take it. And when you do enable it, it's very good. You know, you cast an opt or something, or you just have like an enchantment in play that'll help you draw extra cards every turn. There's a couple of those in this set. Then enabling this, it just becomes really good. You know, 5 mana, 4/4 flyers, very good rate and sealed. So I'll give this a 2 because again, solid bread and butter common for this set. But So Tiny is at least playable pseudo removal in blue. You know, I don't think this is great, and I'm probably just going to give it like a 1.5 because it's not really removal. But I would probably side this in against aggressive decks, and I might even just I might not even side this in. Depends on how many slots I have to fill at the end of the day. But if I have room for this, I'd probably put it in, depending on what kind of deck I'm playing. Like, especially if you're in control or something. This is kind of a 2 mana, you know, a 1 mana removal spell against early game creatures that scales to the late game in a way. So I think it's playable, but not great. So I'll just give it like a 1.5 because it's right at playable. Tome Raider, old Laura Croft, librarian Laura Croft, is again, it's just okay. You know, 3 mana, 1/1 flying, not the best stats, but at least it flies. But the drawing a card is really where you're at here. You know, it's a worse Cloudkin Seer, but like I'll play this anyway. You know, I really don't like the PT on this at all, but I'll probably still play it in the majority of my sealed decks. I'll give it a 2. Unexplained Vision, again, this is very concerning. You can never play this at instant speed. Like you can the other card I was talking about is Like Opportunity, but 5 mana to draw 3 is just good. That's just a good rate. And scrying 3, if you add them in it, that makes this into a very good card. I think that especially for like the control oriented decks, this is amazing. But like, I might even play this in like a relatively aggressive deck, you know, but like a mid-range or control deck in sealed, I play 1 copy of this at least all day because drawing 3 cards is an amazing refill. And if you can scry 3, that's almost, I mean, it doesn't guarantee that you get to your bomb, but it almost does guarantee you're going to see something very impactful for the game that you're in. So even though you're spending 5 mana to ostensibly do nothing at sorcery speed, if you can make it to your next turn, you've almost certainly hit something that's going to change the face of the game. So I think this might be super playable in the decks that want it. I'll give it a 2.5. I think it's, again, one of the better blue commons in the entire set. Vantress Paladin, 4 mana for could be a 3/3 flyer, playable stats, but so is 4 mana for a 2/2 flyer. You want your Windrakes to cost 3 mana, but if I'm looking to fill out my curve in a deck that wants to play a bunch of evasive creatures, which is pretty much any sealed deck, right, then I'm probably okay with playing this. I'll make a face if I don't get adamant on it, but when you do get adamant on it, 4 mana 3/3 flyer is pretty good. It's actually pretty desirable stats. So I'll give the card a 2. I think it's a playable common. Wishful Merfolk is just fine. You know, it's just okay. But I will say, a 2 mana creature that can take out, you know, 3 toughness guys is sometimes really, really good. This is a lot like the Piranhas from the last set, which was a playable card in sealed. So I'll give it a 1.5. Witching, even though I really want to give it a 1, I'll give it a 1.5. Witching Well is actually really good looking to me. Just 1 mana to scry 2 on an artifact is alright. Enables artifact synergies and stuff like that. But sacking it to draw 2 cards later in the game, again, looks very, very good for control decks. I'm not sure how powerful control actually looks in this environment, but blue does, as usual, have a bunch of decent control enablers in the form of like good card advantage pieces, a couple of decent removal pieces in its own right. You know, it doesn't have to lean on black or white too hard this time around. And cards like this which can enable certain synergies that you might want to enable, but also are just good enough on their own. You know, Scrying 2 is decent in sealed to get you to your important cards or get you the lands that you need if you started on a 1 or 2 lander or something. And drawing 2 later in the game is just great. That's fantastic gravy at instant speed. So I think this is a great role player and control decks and such, so I'll give it a 2. All right, like Amy Winehouse, we are back to black here. Let's start with Rankle, Master of Pranks, an absolutely ridiculous card that can do stuff for you no matter what point of the game you're in. You know, you're ahead, you're behind, it's fine. Who cares? It just seems pretty crazy to me. And although a 4-mana 3/3 flying is not the best body in the world, the haste does sort of help enable this a little bit, making sure you'll get at least like 1 clean hit in with it in a lot of games. So I do like that about it. If you do happen to get it, it's a ridiculous card, but I hesitate to call it a bomb, so I'll just give it a 3.5. Now, Cauldron of Eternity is a bomb all day, boy. Now, this does cost a buttload of mana, but if you have like 2 creatures in your graveyard, it still costs 8. Once you hit 3, it costs 6, and it's a little bit better. You know, but I am worried that the mana cost on this is going to be prohibitive most of the time. That said, you rip it off the top of your library on turn 10, you're going to be able to play it, and it's going to win you the game. It's pretty much going to win you most games of Sealed, where you can actually get it onto the battlefield. So I'll call it a bomb and give it a 4, but I'm a little bit wary of how difficult it is to cast, and I definitely don't want it to rot in my hand for the first, like, 6 to 10 turns of the game. That would suck. So do keep that in mind. This one comes with a disclaimer, but if you can get it on the battlefield, it's very likely that you've just swung the game in your favor, especially if you can somehow activate it that turn. It's very good. But anyway, Ayara, have the same problem with this as I will with all of these 3-mana legends. A little bit prohibitive, but in these monocolor and monocolor / very light X splash, it seems very good, but you have to have a bunch of other specifically black creatures to enable this the way you want to, and honestly, sacrificing a creature, not what you always want to be doing in Sealed, so I'm not as impressed by this even as I am some of these other 3-mana legends. I'll just give this one a 2. Blacklance Paragon, however, I am very impressed by because it's just removal 90% of the time. 2-mana, instant speed removal at that, because it's going to be able to give itself Death Touch, and the ability to kill, you know, a 3 converted mana cost creature that's swinging in on you and gain 3 life at instant speed for 2 mana is a ridiculous play. I expect this to not be one of the most important cards in Sealed because, you know, it's rare. Rares rarely are. But if you do pick it up, you play pretty much every copy that you can get your hands on in Sealed, you know, so definitely play this all day. It doesn't constitute a bomb. It doesn't change the makeup of the game the turn it comes down or anything like that. It doesn't nearly guarantee victory either. But the swinginess of this play, I just want to look at it as borderline, you know, super, you know, just effective removal. One of the best removal pieces in the set. It basically kills just about any non-flying creature in Throne of Eldraine for 2 mana, and it's also just a playable body that can swing in on control and stuff, and even like block creatures if it need be. So I just like everything about this, and I'll give it a 3.5, just a little bit better than very playable removal. But Clackbid's Troll, on the other hand, I'm not as impressed by this as a lot of people, but in Sealed it does look like you're getting into bomb territory, you know, so excuse me, I apologize, but it does take 3 turns to like really get in to attacking with this, and by that point your opponent may have found a removal spell, but they also may not have, because this is Sealed and they might have like 4 to 6 removal pieces at max in their deck. If they don't draw it in time, they're just done. So I'd play this pretty much every chance that I got, guaranteed, and it's not even mythic. Like, the card looks mythic, but it's just a rare. You might pick up a copy of this, and if you do, definitely put it in your deck. But will this put me in black if I pick it up? Very, very likely, so I think I got to give the card a 4. It's bomb territory, but Murderous Rider might just be the best freaking card in the set. Again, it's not. This isn't a bomb, I won't say that, but this is super playable removal that converts into a super playable creature, so I at least have to give this thing a 4, if not a 4.5. Oathsworn Knight actually looks really good to me in this environment, you know? It's not completely, you know, immune to removal or anything. They can just hit it with a Doomblade type effect, and that's pretty much it for the Oathsworn Knight. Plus, being able to, you know, having to attack every turn is going to kind of suck against, like, big green creatures and stuff like that, but at the same time, you get a pretty decent you know, body for the rate here. So if you can get it relatively early in the game, I can see this being a very annoying card, and I'd probably at least try out the 1 copy if I got one in my sealed pool. So I got to give this a 3. I think it's probably playable. Let's go down to 2.5. Let's go down to 2.5. But Piper of the Swarm, I want this to be a bomb. I really want this to be a bomb, you know. If you can actually steal a thing off of it, amazing. But it takes, you know, like 4 turns, because this thing has summoning sickness turn it comes into play. But it takes like 4 turns, and it has to not be removed. It takes a total of like 2, 4, 6, 8 mana, you know. It's just, it takes 8, 9, 10, 12 mana to do that. So I'm just not really sure this is as good as it looks. But if all you're doing with it is creating a rat every turn, that's probably good enough, right? So it's just, I see this card being very difficult to beat in sealed once it's down. You know, if you don't have removal for it in a couple of turns, it's just done. So I want to call this a bomb and give it a 4.5. I think that this is probably a ridiculously difficult and annoying card to play against. So I'll give it a 4.5. Wishclaw Talisman, really interesting when viewed in the context of sealed. It's an interesting lens to look at the card through, because like you're going to immediately go get your big bomb, and then they're going to go immediately get their big bomb, right? That's just how this is going to work in sealed 90% of the time. Especially considering if you go get your big bomb creature and they search up removal to kill it, you still get a wish. You know, go get your other best creature, or your actual best creature, or something like that. And that might be really, really good. Just the fact that you get 2 wishes to their 1 on your monkey's paw. That could be nice. So I'll probably give this card like a 3. I'd want to at least try it out, but this is one of the more difficult to evaluate cards for sealed in the whole set. That said, getting 2 tutors to their 1 is probably what makes this card. So I want to give it a 3 at least. Witch's Vengeance is at least going to take out like 1 creature, so it's playable removal. You know, just look at it in that context. Just basically a murder a lot of the time. It's going to kill, you know, especially early and mid-game creatures. So I'd play every copy of it that I got. I'll give it a 3. Belle of the Brawl is definitely gets the SBMTG award for best name of a card in the entire set. Belle of the Brawl. I think that's the entire reason they made the set, is they had the idea for this card name. But in any case, this probably playable, because it's a pretty good night payoff, but it does have to attack, and as soon as it attacks, it's going to get blocked by like a 2-mana 2/2 and just die. So I'm a little bit wary of this thing too, but the Menace is probably the most important ability on this and what makes it its most playable. If they do want to take this down and kill it, they probably have to spend 2 creatures doing so. So, you know, it's probably at least playable if nothing else. I'll give the card a 2. And if you have Knights, it's a 2.5. But Bog Naughty, old Swamp Nasty right here. I love Bog Naughty. It's actually really good if you have the food. But even if you don't, 5-mana 3/3 flyer, that's probably playable, right? That's probably at least okay. Not the best stats, but you probably welcome to play it. And if you have like 3 cards in your deck that make food, there's a chance that this converts into a removal spell, at which point it's ridiculous. You know, an evasive creature that also kills a creature is unbelievable. So if you have food, this is like a 3.5, but even if you don't have any food whatsoever, it's probably a playable 2. That said, again, if you've got food enablers and this thing can actually kill like 2 creatures in a game, it's going to be like the best card in your deck. So maybe one of the best black uncommons, given that you can enable it. Cauldron Familiar, I don't care for it that much. I hate to say it. This is a constructed playable card in very specific decks, but I don't think it's a sealed playable card whatsoever. I don't like 1-drops that much in the first place. The, you know, first line of text on this is just kind of who really cares? About a 2-point life swing most of the time. And there are probably better things to do with your food, but even so, you have to have food to enable the last ability. This is probably just like a half of a point, honestly. Cauldron's Gift, on the other hand, is good, right? I mean, this is a 5-mana reanimation spell that's really easy to cast, so that's good. But if you do go Adamant, you get your creature a little bit bigger. But this is one where you don't have to go Adamant to make the card worth it, and it's just kind of like, not card advantage, but, you know, selection out of your graveyard, bringing back your big bomb or whatever. I like this. Repeating it into the battlefield trigger. I'm a big fan of it. Reanimation spells in general, I have a weakness for them, so I'll give this a 2. Epic Downfall, super playable removal that doesn't take out every creature in the set by any stretch, but you'll still play every copy that you get, so we'll give it a 3. Foulmire Knight, I've gone on record as saying that I really like 1-mana 1/1 death touches in sealed, but this one does even more than that. You can draw a card off of it sometimes. Add instant speed too, so. And just, you know, when your next turn rolls around, you do that at EOT. Next turn rolls around, you untap, get yourself a 1/1 death touch. It's not bad. You know? Again, control decks want this. Aggro decks, especially the ones that want to enable night shenanigans, want this. I think this is a little bit more playable than most 1-drops in sealed. And this is one of the other 1-drops that I like. You know, there was a white 1-drop that I really want to play too. But there are select few 1-drops that I like in sealed. This is one of them. I'll give this at least a 2. Order of Midnight, whew, I'm excited about this card. A 2-mana 2/2 flyer, even if it can't block, is super playable on its own in the sealed environment, but the ability to just get a Raise Dead on your 2/2 flyer for 2, that's so good. This is like one of the best black uncommons to my mind, like easily in the entire set. You'll play every copy of this that you can possibly get. It's a brilliant card. The adventure half on this is just insane. And again, aggressively costed flyer that'll go in not only your aggro decks, but pretty much any deck that plays creatures in sealed. You know, you're playing mid-range, still ridiculously playable. Rip it off the top of your library on turn 6 or something. It's a great top deck. Get that guy back, then play the order, you know. But even if you play it on, you know, turn 4 to get your 2-drop back, then you get, you know, you play your 2-drop on the next turn, or you play your 2-drop that turn, the next turn get Order of Midnight. There's so many good sequences. There's so many good play lines with this card, and it really doesn't matter at what point in the game you get it, and it kind of doesn't even matter if you're ahead or behind, it's going to be good. So I just like everything about Order of Midnight, and I'll give this card a 3. That is a very good score for an uncommon. Yeah, we'll give it a 3. You know, an uncommon that's not removal, it's just like a role player. I actually think I want to give this card a 3.5. It's that good. Revenge of Ravens is fairly bad. This is a fairly bad card that I don't want to play in limited. I'll give it a 0.5 point. Spectre Shriek, sideboard tech for the most part. I'll give it a 0.5 point. Sire Conrad the Grim, ridiculous if you can keep it out, and it shouldn't be too hard to keep it out. This is another one of the better black uncommons in the entire set, and there are multiple ways to enable it too, you know. There are combos and stuff, but for the most part, if your or their creatures are going to the graveyard, you're enabling this, and that just happens in a game of Magic, so it's not even like you have to add cards to your deck to enable it in the first place. It's got a decent body for the mana cost, and an activated ability that's halfway decent. Like, it's just it's a solid Magic card, y'all. We'll give it a 3. Bacon to a Pie, very playable removal. I'll give that a 3 as well. Barrow Witches, I want to give this card like a 2, because you have to have Knights, but again, with so many Knights in the set, this is going to be a mostly better Gravedigger most of the time, and Gravedigger is kind of an iconic creature in sealed play. It's just a baseline, like, good bread and butter creature, so I expect this to be much the same, and the body is much better than Gravedigger, so I really like this. I'll give it a 2 at least. Eye Collector, you know, 1/1 flying for 1 is mostly playable in aggressive decks, but, you know, you don't really care too much about the trigger on this when it does combat damage. Not a huge fan, I'll give it a 1. Festive Funeral, I guess this is playable removal, but I'll just give this like a 2, because I only really want 1 copy of this, and it's not going to be very good until, like, turn 6, 7, 8, you know, like it's just not that good, and it cost a lot to play to begin with, so I'm not a huge fan of this. I don't want, you know, -2/-2 for 5 mana, but it's still removal, so you'll probably play at least the 1 copy of it. I'll give it a 2. Foreboding Fruit, I really like these divination effects, especially the black ones in sealed. Because black is a color that doesn't often get access to these kind of effects. But when they do, they're really, really good. And I don't expect Foreboding Fruit to be much the same. Enables any kind of food synergies that you might need to enable, and there are plenty in sealed. But even just like against aggro, it gains you some life back. It sort of pays for itself and nets you a life in the long run, given that you pay 5 total mana for it. I just like a lot about this. You know, you find your 4th and 5th land some of the time, digs you deeper to your bomb. Really good role player cards like this are, so I'll give it a 2. Forever Young is okay, you know. There's been a lot of cards like this throughout Magic history, and if this puts like 2 creatures back on top of your library, really impactful creatures, and then draws you the first one, that's probably really good, but sometimes these cards like aren't worth a slot. But this one at least draws you a card if nothing else, so I want to give it a 1.5. Giant Skewer, I actually really like this. I know not everybody does, because the equip cost is fairly high on this, but there's a really cool interplay with this. You know, your opponent can either block your creature, or let's start with not block. Your opponent can not block your creature, at which point your guy's getting in for a fair amount of damage. You know, you equip this to a 2/2, you're getting in for 4 every turn, if your opponent doesn't block it. But if your opponent does elect to block your guy, they're probably going to lose whatever dude they have blocked with, and you get a food token, so it really puts them between a rock and a hard place. And I think cards like this are actually okay. I think equipments are especially decent in sealed. So I want to give this card like a 2. I think it's definitely playable. Lash of Thorns is one of my favorite combat tricks in the entire set. A set full of not too many combat tricks. To be honest, a lot of the combat tricks are like on creatures and they're overcosted because they're adventures and stuff. But this, just one slick, clean black mana, that's all you got to pay. And your little tiny dude can take out the biggest guy in their deck, or you can just get through for more damage, you know. Basically add a shock to their face to finish some games. Like, that's good in an aggressive deck too. I really like this card. And even though it's probably not worth more than like one slot, it is a pretty neat little combat trick to have access to. Now, Lochthwain Paladin, I don't much care for. The more I think about this card, I don't really like it. Like, even if you get the Adamant, you get a 4/3, and you know, like, the Menace is good. Menace is a good ability. It enables night shenanigans, blah blah blah. But I still, like, I'm not very impressed when I cast a 4 mana guy and he's got 3 toughness. I don't like that at all. You know, there's a couple of like 2 mana 3/1 guys in this format. I really don't want to lose my 4 mana guy to a 3 power guy. So I just I'm not the biggest fan. Although, yeah, if they block it with a 3/1 and something else, they might still lose their guys. I really don't like 4 mana guys that have 3 toughness. I don't care for it. Hill Giant stats are usually okay, but it bugs me. This card, I don't know why this card bugs me so much, but I really don't want a 4 mana 3/2, and a 4 mana 4/3 just isn't that much better. You know, like a 4 mana 4/3 I have to work for seems kind of terrible. So I'm just gonna give this like a 1.5. Let's give it a 1.5. I could see it being a role-playing common. Lost Legion, however, super good looking to me. 3 mana 2/3, not the best stats, especially considering you have to pay 2 black mana for it. But scrying 2 is just good. That's really good. You know, get to your bomb, get to your lands, whatever. It's just always a fantastic ability. And there's so much like ancillary and tertiary scry on some of these like early 2 and 3 mana cards in this set, that even 1 mana cards in this set, that, you know, Games of Sealed might actually go pretty briskly. You'll find your good cards more easily. It's just, they've really prioritized it more so in this set than usual. So I like that kind of design. I think it streamlines limited play a good bit, and this is one of the cards that does it. I'll give the card a 2. Now, Malevolent Noble, I really want to like this. You know, a 2 mana 2/2 curve filler. I'll play it anyway. And sometimes it's going to get to, you know, 3/3 or 4/4, especially if you have enough artifacts to enable it, because I'd much rather sacrifice artifacts to this than creatures, unless they're creatures that come back or something like that. But if you can get this to like a 4/4 over the course of a game, I think it's pretty good. But the problem is, you've still paid 6 for your 4/4, and sacrifice a couple of things. You know, I don't know about that. Plus, the threat of activation isn't as high as it should be on this. You know, stuff like Nantugo Husk, for instance. You just run it into combat and threaten that if your opponent doesn't block it, you sacrifice all your other stuff to it and get through for 1,000,000. You can't do that with this because you're not going to have like 10 mana open, right? So it's just, I don't like it as much as I want to like it. So I'll just give it a 1.5. Memory Theft, I don't really care for it all that much. You know, these coercion with upside effects are sometimes good in Seal because they'll just take away your opponent's bomb or something. That's not always going to happen. And for 3 mana, even in like control decks, 3 mana, I want to affect the board in some way if I'm playing something for sorcery speed. So I want this to be better than it is, but there are going to be situations you can 2-for-1 your opponent by taking away, you know, plucking a card out of exile. So it might be okay in like control sideboards, but I don't like it aside from that. I'll give it a 0.5 point. Reaper of Night looks crazy to me. 7 mana is so much. 7 mana is so much, but it's basically its own finisher. It's also a Mind Rot. You know, for 4 mana, you're going to 2-for-1 your opponent immediately, but you're not going to affect the board for that 4 mana. That I don't much care for, but again, a little bit later in the game, you get a clean finisher that's effectively a 4/5 flying on most turns. So I want to like this, and again, I think that especially at the common rarity, it's a really neat looking card, but I don't want to give it more than a 2 right now. Again, 2 is solidly playable, but it's not great, and I think that's probably where this card sits. Reeve Soul, super playable removal. Just very, very playable removal. We're going to give that a 3. Smitten Swordmaster. If you have like 3 knights out, it's just okay. But again, it doesn't affect the board, you know. But I'll take a Child of Night, a 2 mana 2/1 lifelink that has the ability to do something else sometimes for just 1 mana. Yeah, I'll take that. I'll take that all day. So I'll give this like a 1.5. I'll play this card. Enables night shenanigans, fills out your curve, whatever. Tempting Witch, great payoff for food if you're in food, you know. And there are quite a few different like food enablers in the sealed environment, but I'm still not totally sure. You know, 3 mana 1/3 is, I don't like those stats, kid. And you know, it does get you a food when it ETBs, so I don't hate the card, but I will just give it like a 2. I think it's just slightly better than, well, no, I'll give it a 1.5. I'll give it a 1.5 here because I think it's solidly playable. If you're in food, it's a 2. maybe even a 2.5, because, you know, being able to convert your food into actual damage might be a huge game, but this looks like more of a draft card than a sealed card to me, all things considered. Now, Wicked Guardian to finish off black here is a 4-mana 4/2, so it's just okay, but it's very often like not going to draw you the card the turn it comes out. You know, if you have a 3 toughness creature, it will, at which point it's really good. You know, 4 points of power and a drawn card is nice for that rate, but I don't think that it's going to do its thing most of the time, and I really don't like 2 toughness at 4 mana either, so I don't want to give the card more than 1.5. But here we are at the red cards. Now, we'll start with Embercleave here, which I want, again, this is one of those I want to like more than I do in Sealed. Now, +1/+1 and Double Strike and Trample, all really good stat lines, but you have to have a fair amount of creatures attacking in to get the play that you want on this. That said, if you do get the play that you want, it's a ridiculous card. And even if you don't, and you just play it like second main phase or at the end of your opponent's turn or something like that, for, you know, let's say all 6 mana at the end of your opponent's turn, then you can still equip it when you go, and suddenly you've got like the best creature on the battlefield. So I think this is close to a bomb, but not quite a bomb. I'll give it a 3. I think it's solidly playable. A little bit more than solidly playable, but again, I don't think this is a bomb. That said, I can see it being fairly tough to beat once it does hit the table, so I'll bump that up to a 3.5. Robber of the Rich, ridiculous. Card's ridiculous, you know, but it probably won't amount to much more than a 2-mana 2/2 in a lot of games I'm Sealed. So I'm going to give this, I mean, it's ridiculous for Constructed, I would imagine, but for Sealed, I think I'm probably just going to give this like a 2, 1.5. I'll give it a 1.5. Well, 2. I'll give it a 2. We'll bump it up, because like a 2-mana 2/2 is just like that's like a 1, you know. But the ability to occasionally quote draw you a card is probably worth 0.5 point, and then Reach and Haste is worth another 0.5 point. I'll give it a 2. But Bone Crusher is crazy. This is super playable removal and a very stout body for the mana cost that you're pumping into it. And it's sort of, you know, removal proof in a way. Not necessarily, but your opponent at least has to take 2 to the face to actually target it with anything. So that said, you can't really hit it with like combat tricks or anything, but I'm not that worried about it, you know. This is going to make a huge splash in Standard. It's one of the best cards in the set for Constructed, but for Sealed, also one of the best cards in the set. Pretty hands down. This card isn't a huge bomb or anything. It will change the complexion of the game, but not in such a way that you more or less win by default as soon as you drop it. So I can't really call it a bomb, but I will give the card at least a 4. Now, Fervent Champion is okay, you know, just a 1-mana 1/1, first strike and haste is probably worth at least something in Sealed, but not that much, to be honest. But neither one of those abilities at just 1 power are great. And yeah, there are a fair amount of equipments, so that last ability might be alright, but it's mostly the second one that I'm worried about enabling in Sealed. I think this is okay, even though you're probably just going to get 1 attack in with it. It's basically got like the same text as Bellow the Brawl, except it only gives 1 attacking knight, the extra bonus. So I think this is probably at least playable, but like literally 0, nothing to write home about. So I'll give it a 1. You're going to play it sometimes. You're probably going to play it every time, but it's not going to be that impactful in most games of Magic. Fires of Invention, however, super crazy card. I'm actually not sure how great this is in Sealed. I expect this to be very good in Constructed Magic, possibly even like Modern, but definitely Standard. Card is bonkers there, but I'm not sure that in a game where you really don't get that much control over how you build your deck or your card pool, that it's going to be that good. I'd probably still at least try it for the shiggles, you know, test it out. But I'll probably just give this card like a 1.5. It's probably not as good in Sealed as it is in like literally any other format you could play the card. But let's move on to Ironcrag Feat, which I could kind of have the same spiel about, unless you have specific things to enable this. It's just not that good, and most of the time it's not going to be that good. I'll give it like a 0.5 point. Again, in Constructed Magic, the card probably has more than 1 or 2 unfair applications, but in Sealed Magic, the card is probably just bad. This is a bad Magic card. Ironcrag Pyromancer, however, is a very good Magic card, and the best of this entire, you know, when you draw your second card of the turn cycle. But again, these look like more like draft pieces that you have to pick up specific cards to enable better, you know, and in Sealed, you just really can't guarantee that you do that. But if you can proc this at least once in Sealed, it's probably worth it, you know, it's a removal spell that blocks. So that's probably at least okay, but, you know, I'm not as excited about it in Sealed as I am in other formats, which I've said about a lot of these so far. Now, Opportunistic Dragon, on the other hand, actually looks pretty good. in sealed. Now, I don't like this card in constructed. I think it's actually just terrible. But a 4-mana 4/3 flying is at least okay stats. And sometimes you'll snag something. Every now and again, you'll grab it. You know, it's fine. it's at least okay. I mean, I guess it can't really do anything after you snag it, but you're still kind of 2-for-1-ing your opponent. If they have a human or an artifact, at least. But even if they don't, I mean, you'll take the stats on this most times. So I'll give it like a 3. Yeah, I'll give it like a 3. Stout body's stout enough, but for those situations where you actually like it completely invalidate a human on the other side of the table and it's basically removal, that's very good. But anyway, Sundering Stroke is... I want to rate this card highly because it's effectively like a sweeper, right? But it costs 7 mana. It's so much. Like even in sealed, that is so much mana. So I'm just going to give this card like a 2. I'd probably play the 1 copy of it, but very likely it's going to rot in your hand forever, and you're going to die before you can even cast it. And you're going to tell your opponent too. You're going to be like, dude, I had stroke in my hand for the last like 5 turns. And they're going to be like, what are you talking about stroking over there? But it's not going to matter to them, but it's going to make you very upset. That you just looked at this card that could have saved you forever, but you never got to 7 mana. So I think this card might be a trap in sealed, but when you can cast it, it's very good. That said, I'll just give it like a 2, maybe even a 1.5. Torbran, Thane of Redville, is crazy. This card is crazy and constructed, and probably crazy in sealed too, especially if you've managed to construct a mostly mono red deck in sealed. This card is just off the freaking rails, and I'll give it a 3.5. Yeah, because like the stats are at least okay for the mana cost if you can cast it. That's the worst thing about the card is if you can cast it. But if you can, and once it's out, it just like has immediate effect on the table as soon as you play it. It makes all your creatures that much better, and especially all your burn spells too. So if you have burn spells, but mostly I'm just looking to like try to crash through the line with this. You know, even if your opponent blocks, you're dealing a bunch more damage with your guys. So, card looks crazy, especially in aggressive decks specifically. So, it's not going to be playable in, like, every deck in sealed. Not even every red deck. But in those super aggressive decks, this is definitely a ridiculous card. But Burning Yard Trainer actually kind of looks like one of the better Knight payoffs in a way. I mean, 5 mana for 3/3 Trample Haste isn't great. But the enter the battlefield trigger looks really nice on this, you know. +2/+2, trample and haste until end of turn. You're effectively putting 5 hasty power onto the battlefield all at one time. Now, you have to have another knight to enable it, so that makes it a little bit worse, but when you can't enable the card, it's actually a pretty good deal for 5 mana. I mean, that's a lot of attacking power all at one time that your opponent may not have accounted for when you started your turn, so I actually think this looks like a pretty playable common, and it does get half of a point better if you have knights. It actually gets like a full point better if you have knights, but I'll give it like a 2 for now, because I think I'd play it in a lot of limited decks, but especially if you have knights, solid 2. But Claim the Firstborn, it's probably a sideboard card, so I'm just going to give it like a half of a point. I expect this to be very good in constructed Magic, but you can't guarantee you can even play this card against every sealed deck that you come up against. Nearly every one, yes, but like this is just a completely dead card in your main deck against most control decks in sealed, and there are a few of them. Every pre-release you'll come up against a control deck most of the time, and even against a lot of mid-range decks, this isn't going to do a whole heck of a lot. You know, especially the turn past when you cast it. So I just don't think it's that effective, although I will say these threaten effects can sometimes be really good in aggressive sealed decks. I do keep it in mind, but I'm not going to give it more than like 1.5, honestly. Ember Shieldbreaker, on the other hand, pretty decent. You know, this is a sideboard card for the most part, but it does enable knight synergies and such, and it's a decent curve filler in and of itself. Sometimes it'll bust up an artifact. Again, there are enough artifacts in the sealed environment that I think you probably just get away with playing this in your main deck, so I'll give it a 1.5. Now, Ferocity of the Wilds looks insane, specifically again for aggressive decks. I could see, like again, mono white or mono red being really good aggressive decks, but especially like Boros slanted towards one, you know, color or the other, seems like it's probably going to be like, again, like the premier, as it usually is, the premier aggro option in the sealed environment. And with cards like this, I can see why. I mean, it's an Orcish Oriflamme for 1 mana less, and that kind of Anthem effect is actually really desirable. The problem is, there are a bunch of human knights, like the last one we just covered, and then the one before that we covered. There are a fair amount of human knights, so it's possible that not all your guys are going to get this bonus, but +1/+0 and Trample is nothing to sneeze at in an aggressive deck in Limited, and I'd probably play every copy of this I picked up if I was trying to go aggressive. So I'll give this card a 2. I think it's solid. Joust, kind of a red fight effect that requires you to not only have a creature, but kind of have a knight, you know? Like, it doesn't have to be a knight, but it really helps if it is. That said, it's playable removal, and even though it's like a red Prey Upon for 1 mana more for most intents and purposes, I still think it's worth playing in most of your sealed decks, so I'll give the card a 2.5. It seems good to me. Mad Ratter is crazy. This is pretty crazy, but again, it seems like relatively tough to enable in sealed, a lot easier to enable in draft, you know, so I'm not really sure how much I like this card, especially considering the initial stats you're getting for the mana cost are pretty bad, so I'll just give the card like a 1.5, because I think that if you can enable it, it's very good, but most of the time you won't be able to, so probably a 1, really. Red Cap Melee, on the other hand, it's just okay. You know, again, you might play this card in your main deck. Even if you're not playing against red decks, like, it's still 1 mana for 4 damage, and that might be worth a land in a lot of cases, especially if you're in the relative late game or mid game even in your aggressive decks. Sacrificing a land is nothing for a removal spell, so I'll give this like a 2.5. It takes a 0.5 point dip, really, just because it's more of a sideboard card. But again, I'd be more than happy to play this in most aggressive limited decks, so give it a 2.5. Skullknocker Ogre, it is a random discard, but it just doesn't look that great to me. Again, you know, 4 mana, 4/3, looks like good stats, but I'm just not really that excited about 3 toughness for 4 mana. There's something about it always turns me off. I don't think it's worth it half the time. You know, I don't want my 4 mana guy to die to a 3/1 for 2 mana. I just don't. So I'm not a huge fan of this, but I will give it like a 1.5 because it's more than playable curve filler in most situations. Slaying Fire, this looks very good to me. Like, very good, even possibly constructed playable. I know that sounds crazy, but 3 mana for 4 damage in constructed is actually pretty good, but we're talking about sealed here, where this is just a card you'll play every single time. I mean, you'll play every copy of this that you get in any red deck, regardless of whether or not it's aggressive, regardless of whether or not you're going to really hit the adamant every time. It's 3 mana is still worth the lightning bolt and sealed every day of the week. So, and if you can get 4 damage, if you get a char off of it, you know, it's just ridiculous. It's going to take down the majority of creatures in the set. So, love this card. And I think that it's suddenly one of the most playable cards in all of red in the entire set. And I even mean for like constructed play, to be honest. I mean, I think there's a scant chance this is a constructed sleeper, but we'll talk more about that in a different video. But anyway, I'm going to go ahead and give this a 3 at least for sealed play, because again, you're going to play every copy that you get. Now, Surkara the Bold, not that excited about, you know, 5 mana 3/3. It can ping for a damage to any target, so it's effectively removal. It's also a clock on your opponent, and I'm kind of excited about that, but it's going to be relatively tough to enable the, you know, first line of text on it more than once or twice in the game. That said, I will say, if this 5 mana 3/3 kills a 1 toughness creature, or cleans up 1 creature after combat for you or something like that, and draws you 1 card in the course of a game, it's probably worth the investment. So, not quite a bomb, but I'll still give the card like a 2.5. If I'm in red and I see the card, I'm playing it. As far as Barge In, card is fairly bad, you know, it's okay. It looks really good, right? In like Gruul decks that have a bunch of big creatures and stuff that need to crash through the line in the late game, this could be a pseudo overrun effect just because it gives most of your creatures trample. And the +2/+2 for 1 mana is at least a decent combat trick. In fact, one of the best rates on a combat trick in the entire format. So I'd probably play 1 copy of this at least in my aggressive deck, if not 2. And that gives it at least a 2. But combat tricks to me really don't get above a 2 most of the time. That said, this is a very playable one. Bloodhaze Wolverine is just okay, but I mean, that's pretty much it. You know, it's going to be few and far between that you actually get to enable this in sealed. So I'm just going to give the card a 1 as curve filler. Blow Your House Down might win you the game in your aggressive deck in sealed, but then again, it might rot in your hand forever and never do anything. So I'll give it a 1. Brimstone Trebuchet is quite good in terms of just putting a clock on your opponent. And yeah, you can enable knights with this. It does have reach, blocks flying creatures like windrakes and such. All of that is really, really good. You know, it's not the best stats in the world, but it does do more than one thing. So I'll give this a 1.5 or maybe even a 2. I'll give it a 1.5. I think it's slightly less playable than a 2. That said, you'll play it. This will end up in your sealed deck some of the time, and you'll feel perfectly happy about it. Crystal Slipper, I kind of like. You know, this basically makes every creature that you draw for the rest of the game a live draw immediately. Even if it doesn't have an ETB trigger or anything, it can go ahead and attack. So when you do draw your big, you know, 5/5 flying bomb or whatever, given that you have an extra mana to pay, on turn 7 or 8 or however late in the game it is, then you immediately get not only the power bonus, but you get to swing with it. So that seems good to me, and I think this is probably worth 1 slot in your sealed deck, so I'll give it a 2, but I don't think it goes much higher than that. That said, pretty playable card, I shouldn't have to tell you. Embereth Paladin, a 4-mana 4/1 haste I don't care for, and I don't really care for a 4-mana 5/2 haste either. To be honest with you, I mean, these are both not super attractive stat lines. Sometimes it's going to be like a lava coil, or not a lava coil, a lava axe that just hits your opponent in the face for 5. And I guess that's okay, but I really don't want to trade my 4-drop for a 2-drop. I don't want to do it. So even if you get the adamant on this, I'm not really a huge fan. I'll give it a 1. Fling, it's removal, right? I mean, Fling usually gets like a 1.5 in sealed environments, and I don't think that's any different here. Merchant of the Veil, I really like this card. I really like this card a lot. For constructed specifically, but I think I like it for sealed too, 3-mana 2/3, I've always liked those more than 3-mana 3/2s in sealed. And this is a nice little engine for you, If you draw a land or a card you don't want or whatever, then once a turn at least, if not twice a turn, then this can refresh your hand and stuff and pitch crap for hopefully good stuff. And the Adventure Heft isn't half bad either. You might as well cast it if you're trying to sort of, fix your hand from the early game. So this might actually be a super playable card in just about every format of Magic that exists, from Pauper to Standard to Modern to Sealed. So I'll go ahead and give the card a 2. I think it's probably going to show up most of the time in your Sealed deck. Ogre Errant, it's got to be Shrek under there. Look at him. But anyway, this is at least okay. Again, this can enable like some night shenanigans and whatnot, but a 4-mana 3/4 is at least decent stats in and of itself. It's got the right creature type, and it pays off knights. I'll give this like a 1.5, but if you have knights, it's a 2. Even if you have knights, it's not like amazing, but it's still okay. Raging Redcap, a 3-mana 1/2 double strike is playable. I think that's probably playable. But at the same time, it's also like just a Scathed Zombies. It's just like a Grey Troll, a 3-mana 2/2 effectively. But the moment you get an Anthem effect or an Aura on this, they can just go crazy. So there are some interactions where the card is probably at least okay. But even then, I don't want to put like an All That Glitters on this and then just immediately gets hit by a 2-mana removal spells. I'm a little bit wary of the card, but Double Strike is obviously a desirable ability. I'll give it a 1.5. I really want to give it a 1, but I'll give it a 1.5 just because Double Strike is broken. But Redcap Raiders, a 3-mana 3/2, I just said, not a huge fan of those. And being able to give it +1/+1 and trample at the expense of not attacking with another creature is just not, it just doesn't seem that thrilling to me. To be honest, to get a 4/3 for 3 is at least decent stats, but having to take another creature out of combat it kind of sours the deal a little bit. So I'm just going to give this card a 1.5. I think it's probably playable in aggressive decks, but again, having to cut one of your creatures out of combat sucks. But anyway, Rimrock Knight looks really good to me in just about every format. This is a playable combat trick, if nothing else. It's also a 2-mana 3/1. That's good. I don't care that it can't block. You're playing in aggressive decks. So in aggressive decks, not only an aggressively statted creature, but it's a pretty aggressively costed combat trick too. So I'll give this a 2.5. I think this is like more than playable in pretty much every deck with red, especially obviously the aggressive ones. And it might be one of the best red commons in the set as far as just creatures go. Just really aggressively costed in every way. But Scorching Dragonfire is super playable removal that you're going to play every single copy of. Another one of the best red commons in the set. I'll give it a 3. Searing Barrage, again, 5 mana seems like so much, but it kills the thing, so you play it. I'll give it a 2.5. Well, we'll give it a 2. We'll give it a 2. I really don't care about the adamant bonus on this in most cases. I'll just give it a 2. 7 Dwarves, really neat, but it's crap. It's just total crap. Even if you pick up, let's say you pick up 4 copies of this, it might be worth it. Like, it might be. But if you pick up 2 copies of this, you probably don't play it. You probably don't play it. But the real possibility on the other hand. Oh, by the way, did I even score the card? Half a point. Because 2 mana for a 2/2 is curve filler. And if you ever get a second copy out, then you have 2 2-mana 3/3s, right? So it could be okay. I'll give it half a point, but it's not okay. But Thrill of Possibility is, it's basically Tormenting Voice at instant speed. This is a way in sealed at the common rarity to enable all these things that want you to draw your second card in a given turn. So just for that reason, it's like super impactful, and it goes along with a bunch of interesting synergies. But it's just playable in and of itself too if you just want to fix your hand or like dump something in the graveyard for some reason. Like maybe you have that reanimation spell in black. So there are a lot of different ways to, reasons to want to play this card. So I'll go ahead and give it a 1.5. Just because there's a lot of reasons to not play the card too, It's like, how many actual spell slots do you have in most decks, especially the aggressive decks that, or the red decks that might want something like this. Like, Tormenting Voice isn't the most playable sealed card in the world. I'll give this a 1.5 just because of the instant speed playability. But Weaselback Redcap is pretty bad. It's fairly bad. Just 1 mana for a 1/1. Don't like it. And then even the ability to pump it, still not a huge fan. It's like sometimes this will take out a 3 toughness creature, but usually, you're going to have to pay, always, the 2 mana for it. And at that point, you've paid just as much. If their 3 toughness creatures are 3-drop, you've paid just as much to take it out. You didn't actually gain any sort of mana or tempo advantage on that. So, not a huge fan of this. I'd probably just give it like a 0.5 point. All right, let's go big green here to round things off. We've still got to do gold cards and artifacts and stuff, but we're getting there here. Now, Questing Beast to start things off is a ridiculous bomb that nonetheless can be outclassed by a 4/5, so do keep that in mind. It's actually not like the best creature in the set, no matter how much text it actually has on it. And it'll occasionally take out a Planeswalker. Death Touch is good enough, especially against the stuff that can kill it. Haste is ridiculous. Vigilance is ridiculous. Like, this will win you the game some of the time when it comes down, but when you really boil it down, a 4-mana 4/4 is probably not a bomb, even with all this text on it. So I'm just going to give it a 3.5. You play it when you see it, but it doesn't necessarily change the complexion of the entire game when it comes down like you want it to. Not every time. Sometimes it will, but not every time like some of these, like the Great Hinge, for instance, where if you just have a 3-power creature in play, then suddenly this costs 6 mana, and that doesn't seem half bad. Suddenly, all your creatures get bigger. When you play them, you're drawing a bunch of cards, you have a ramp, you're gaining life every turn, if nothing else. Like, at the very least, you're gaining life every turn. So, I like this. I feel like it doesn't really have to be enabled that much, honestly. A 4-power creature. How hard is that? We just looked at one. There's at least 2 more on this line of cards to choose from. Like if you have a Feasting Troll King out, it just costs 2 mana. It won't. Usually, I don't like cards that like require you to have creatures out to be good. But like if you have literally one creature out that's a 3/3 or 4/4, this becomes much easier to cast. So I really think this may be one of the best legendary artifacts in the entire cycle for pretty much any format, but especially for sealed. It's just a ridiculous bomb, and I'll give this card a 4.5. Once it's on the battlefield, it probably wins you the game, so, just play it. This puts you in green, I would imagine. Feasting Troll King doesn't necessarily put you in green. It requires a huge commitment, but this, too, is a ridiculous bomb. It's a ridiculous bomb, one of the better green cards in the set, and it's not even mythic. Again, this seems like it should be mythic. You're a little bit more likely to see it than you are a card like Beast or Great Hinge, so do keep that in mind. Just a 7-power Vigilance Trample thing will win the game in and of itself, but the ability to bring it back at least once, crazy. And even if you never bring it back, you get basically 9 life off of the food tokens, and that's a good enough swing right there. Card does more than one thing, and is recursive. That's the word I'm looking for. I've known the word for 25 years, but anyway, the card is recursive, ridiculous stats, and not actually that difficult to cast in terms of how much it costs. Now, the colored mana symbols are a different story. You really want to be mostly mono green to cast this, but that's really the only setback to the card whatsoever. Aside from that, once the card does hit the table, it's nearly unbeatable in most cases, so I'll give this at least a 4. Gilded Goose is just okay. I will say, one of the best things about this for sealed play is actually one of the most, hated things about it when people evaluate it for constructed play, and that's the ability to create a food token. That's actually really good in sealed. There's a bunch of different things that you need food tokens for, whether it's the witch that converts food into damage, or the black and green gold creature that draws a card if you sack 2 foods. Feasting Troll King, just looked at that. I mean, there's a fair amount of food payoffs in this set, and the ability to just have a thing that creates food on a stick is actually really good. And if nothing else, it's a 0/2 flyer for a mana. It'll block some of the time, so I can't really rate the card too high, but I will give it like a 1.5, and if you're playing food, it's like a 2.5, because having a food generator on a stick is just a dream for that deck. So yeah, play it if you want to enable food synergies, but aside from that, it's not that great. Lovestruck Beast is also not as good as it might look. Like, you do get 2 creatures on this card for 4 mana. You basically get a 6/6 for 4 mana, in a way, spread among 2 bodies. And that's pretty good. And if you still have the 1/1 when you cast Lovestruck Beast, you'll eventually be able to attack with it. It all seems good, but if they take out the 1/1, it's going to be much harder to enable this card, especially given that you're probably not going to be playing too many, 1-mana 1/1s in your deck. You just don't want to do that in sealed most of the time. And if you get like 2 Lovestruck Beasts by, some miracle, then like maybe you want to consider playing those 1-mana 1/1s, but it's just not something you have a whole lot of in your sealed deck. Nonetheless, this can block, if nothing else, and it at least creates 2 bodies, right? So that seems good. I'll give the card a 3, but I think it's going to be a little bit harder to enable than it might look. Once Upon a Time, although, maybe, let me go back up to it for a second. Removal's at a bit of a premium in sealed, more so than just about any other format. Removal's insanely important, and there's very little of it. And they don't want to waste their removal on a 1/1, right? I'll just waste their removal on Lovestruck Beast, but if they can't kill Lovestruck Beast, they have to, use one of those black 2-mana removal spells to kill like your 1/1, and that probably doesn't feel very good for them. So that might make the card a little bit better than I think. But Once Upon a Time is like has one of the biggest gaps between constructed playability and sealed playability in the entire set. But that said, it's probably still sealed playable because it's really good card selection for 2 mana. You get sort of an impulse that digs even deeper. So I'd still play this in sealed. I'll give it a 2.5. It's decent card selection. Return of the Wild Speaker is off the freaking rails. This card is unbelievable. I really like this in constructed. Although, again, this is one of those that you have to have creatures to truly enable. So I'm always a little bit wary about those because you're not always going to have creatures. You're just not in any game of Magic. But, especially in sealed where your pick of the litter as far as creatures go is relatively thin. And there's, relatively few little removal spells going around, but removal's at such a premium that none of your creatures are safe. So I don't care for cards that you must have creatures to enable, but at the same time, if this draws you 3 or 4 cards at instant speed, it's more than worth it for 5 mana. And if it just gets you to break through the line and gets 4 out of the 5 members of your team +3/+3 and just wins you the game, the card seems like a bomb to me, so I'll give it a 4, but that's a tentative 4. That's a tentative 4. Wicked Wolf is a 4-mana 3/3, which I don't like. But it's also removal, which I do like. It also has to have food to be truly enabled to the level that you need it to be enabled at, and I don't like that. But that said, if you even have one food, just one food, the card is crazy, right? At least to my mind, getting eventually a 4/4 that survives removal or combat at least one time, that's very good. Even if you slap it into play, immediately consume a food, and put a +1/+1 counter on it, kill something that's 4 toughness, and keep your Wicked Wolf out to attack. That's insane. It's way better than even Ravenous Chupacabra, and that was a crazy card in sealed. But this isn't always going to kill the thing that it fights, even, or it's not even always going to have a real target. If your opponent has a 5 toughness creature the turn it comes out, it's going to be tough. So it's not always going to be Chupacabra, but in most situations it's better. So I got to give this card a 4. It's just that good. It's a meaty creature that usually kills something when it ETBs. So yeah, we'll give it a 4. It's a very good card. Wild 3.5. Yeah, I'll stick with 4. I think it's that good. Wildborn Preserver is nutso. A lot of these green cards are crazy. Not only does it have the flash and the reach, so it's just good. 2-mana 2/2 flash reach is good, but this has the ability to just become freaking enormous. If your opponent doesn't do anything about it, what are they, you're going to have a 10/10 before too long. You can easily have an 8/8 on turn 6 or 7 because of Wildborn Preserver. And I really like these 2-drops that get bigger as the game goes on. They scale up. Those are usually very good both in constructed formats and in limited environments. So I don't think it's any different here. If you have extra mana to sink into it when you cast a creature, you might as well, right? So, as long as you have enough non-humans to enable this, and you ought to in green, then card just looks really difficult to stop in sealed. So I want to give this thing a 4 as well, but it's probably more of a 3.5 to be honest. But this thing could really get huge. This thing could really get huge and be the most important threat on the table in a hurry. So I want to give it a 4. I think when it does come out, it'll control the battlefield a lot of the time. Yorvo, on the other hand, is one of the more impressive of these 3-mana legends that cost 3 of their respective color. It is tough to cast, just like all of these are, but it's a 3-mana 4/4, and the moment you start playing creatures, it gets huge. So I just, I'm a little bit wary about a card that's nothing but stats. I mean, I guess Wildborn Preserve is nothing but stats, but it's like really aggressively costed. It has 2 keyword abilities. I mean, it's fine. But this is literally nothing but stats. But it too scales really well as the game goes on. Rewards you for playing creatures, which you're going to do in green anyway. This too, just like Preserver, can easily become the most important threat on the battlefield within just a couple of turns. So I want to say this is a huge bomb, and provided that you have the mana to play it, you know, even in like green, splash, another color, you can probably get this on turn 4 fairly easily. And even then, on turn 4, it's like very impactful. So I want to, yeah, I'll stick with a 4 on this one too. This card is ridiculous. Beanstalk Giant, I think, is a really important uncommon role player in green. I like this card for constructed a little bit, but well, that's another thing we can talk about at a later date. As far as limited goes, 7 mana is a lot, but it's kind of just 6 mana because it goes and gets one of its mana on its own, you know. So I like that. I don't like that you're not really affecting the battlefield on turn 3, but if you're looking to cast all these, you know, really expensive cards that we've seen so far in this set, especially the ones that are like creatures with an adventure heft, like Beanstalk Giant himself, then it's, you know, it's going to be really nice to have this, and it's its own payoff. It's its own ramp payoff, which I really, really think is something that people are underrating about the card. Is that not only is it ramp, but it also gives you something to, you know, actually do with your ramp. That's great. So I think this is actually a pretty decent playable limited card, but again, when you first cast it, it doesn't affect the board that much, aside from the ramp. And you might not get to the second half of it till a good long time into the game. So I'm just going to give this a 2.5. I think it's very playable, but I don't think it's incredible. Edgewall Innkeeper does enable Lovestruck Beast, so you got that going for you. And again, there are 30 adventure cards at lower rarities in this set, so it's very possible that you'll draw a card or two off of this in a given game. And if there's like one mana 1/1 in the whole set that I want to play, it might be this one. So I'll give it a 2. I can't really go much higher than that, but if you draw a card off of this in a game, it's probably worth putting in your sealed deck. Flaxen Intruder don't impress me much. In the words of Shania Twain, yes, in the words of the immortal Shania Twain, don't impress me much. 7 mana is a lot, even for 3 bodies. It's just so much. Even though this could have, you know, eventually kill something, the creature half of it, you have to sacrifice it to do that. I don't think it's going to be worth the slot in your limited deck most of the time. I'll give it a 0.5 point. Although maybe it'll surprise us. I really don't think so. Giant Opportunity, pretty decent, again, if you can enable food. But I think this is more of a draft card than a sealed card. That said, creating 3 food tokens is going to be able to do all kinds of crazy stuff. And if you want to enable food, you put this card in your deck all day. So in the food decks, it's like an easy 2.5. But in most decks, I just give this like a 1. Keeper of Fables is crazy. This is 5 mana for a 4/5, so the stats are there at the very least. You know, I'll take 5 mana for a 4/4 most days in limited. So the extra point of toughness is huge. Huge in most cases. It's huge. If you don't understand how much of a difference a 4/4 and a 4/5 is, go watch Sam's new video on Siege Rhino over at Ristic Studies. It's a really good video he just put out. But yeah, it really illustrates the difference between 4 and 5 toughness in a given format. And Keeper of Fables having that extra point, huge deal. But this is another thing that'll occasionally draw you a card, and actually has the chance to draw you like 2 or 3 cards over the course of a game, especially if you're able to go wide enough to enable this, and more than one copy on the table at the same time is just obscene. So I think this is one of the better uncommons in green, to be honest, and I'll go ahead and give it a 2.5. 3. I'll give it a 3, actually. Can you tell I didn't rehearse this? This just was seat of my pants, you know, but I'll give this card a 3. I do think it's one of the more important green uncommons. Same thing with Kinder's Transformation, though. You know, KT is just kind of green removal, just a little bit, and it draws a card like a cantrips. Like, what do you want? The card is unbelievable. Even though it's not straight up removal, it's about as close as green gets without fight effects. So I'll give the card at least a 2, maybe a 2.5 because it draws you a card. 2.5. Yeah, we'll give it a 2.5. Even though, yeah, you probably do play it in like every sealed deck. Screw it. Anyway, Oakham Adversary is more of a sideboard card than anything, but I'll give it a solid 1.5. Because this could be curve filler. 4 mana 2/3 Death Touch is kind of a removal spell, if nothing else. So that's probably good. But if you are playing against another green deck, then it's just an unbelievable card. So I'll go ahead and do that. I'll give it a 1.5. Once in Future is just okay. The best thing about this is the instant speed. But this looks more constructed playable than sealed playable. That said, it's pretty easy, you know, card advantage in green for 4 mana. And again, add instant speed. So I think this might be better than I'm currently evaluating it, and I'll actually give it a 2 here. I'll give it a 2 because I think you probably are going to play this in most games of Magic. Now, Sir Farron the Hingehammer does lose some points for being 2 green mana, but It's just crazy and aggressive decks. It really is. So I got to give this thing like at least a 2. Because again, solid playable, although it's a little bit tough to nail that mana cost in the early game. Still a 2-mana 2/2 that's going to end up, effectively bringing 4 power into the battlefield most turns. So I do like the card. I think it's really aggressive. And in those like green-red decks, those green-white decks, probably do some good work for you, even if you drop it on like turn 4. So I give the card a 2. Trail of Crumbs, the best, food enabler in the entire set. But probably, again, I keep saying this, I don't think that food is as realistic in sealed as it is in draft, where again you have a little bit more control over what you're actually building. And this looks like more like they're sewing the food mechanic into draft playability and the night payoff mechanics into sealed playability. I'm just not really sure how great this is going to be in sealed. It's a really tough call, but if you do have enough food to enable this, it's an easy 2.5. It's a ridiculous card that provides a lot of card advantage, but if nothing else, it's going to get you at least a food token to enable other food strategies. So, I don't know. I'd probably give it like a 0.5 if you don't have enough to enable it. But if you do, it's like one of the best cards in your deck. Now, Curious Pair, also going to see a lot of play in these food decks. Just 1 mana for a food token, good rate, but you also get at least a halfway decent blocker on a later turn, or even on the same turn if you have 3 mana to play. So, a 3 mana 1/3 that puts a food token into play. I've already talked about this with the Witch. Not the best stats in the world, but the decks that play food do really want this. So I'll probably give this a 1. I'll give this a 1. But again, in food decks, it's like a 1.5. You play it. But it's just a role player and nothing more. Fell the Pheasant, sideboard tech, but it does create a food token, but sideboard tech nonetheless. I'll give it a 0.5 point. Fierce Witchstalker is absolutely unbelievable. Just a 4 mana 4/4 trample that gives you a food token at common. At freaking common. Like, how is that not one of the best commons in the entire set? I don't know. I'll give this thing a 3.5. It's that good. Now, Garen Brigg Carver, I really don't like the body. A 4 mana 3/2 is not. That's just not good. Like, I don't like 3 mana 3/2, so a 4 mana 3/2 is right out, as they might say. Now, Shield's Might, though, is a pretty good combat trick, right? Like, I think this makes this card playable. Because 2 mana for a 2/2, for +2/+2, not necessarily the best thing ever, but still, like, it's not an overcosted, not an insanely, obscenely overcosted combat trick. It's still worth playing most of the time. And if this can, again, save a creature in combat, and, have a small guy kill a bigger guy and survive, and then later you get a 3/2, it's effectively a 2-for-1. And that's pretty good. So, I got to give the card at least a 2, but it's more of a role player than anything. It's just a solid card, but it's not, much to write home about. But I'd probably be more than happy to play 1 copy of this in a particularly aggressive green deck, because I do like the instant speed combat trick half of it. But Garen Brigg Paladin, again, I don't necessarily mind 5 mana 4/4s, so this is okay. And if you do get the Adamant, you get a 5 mana 5/5 with at least a decent thing that they will eventually keyword. They've got to keyword this ability eventually. But in any case, a 5 mana 4/4, decent. 5 mana 5/5, good. So I'll give the card a 1.5. Probably again a good like bread and butter common if you're trying to fill out your curve at the relatively high points on the curve in green. Now, Garen Brigg Squire is an adventure payoff and a 2 mana 2/2. So I'm going to go ahead and give this like a 1.5, but it's only ever going to be like a 3/3. Like, most of the time it's going to be a 3/3 unless you can orchestrate a turn where you get like 2 or 3 adventure creatures out of exile all at the same time with a bunch of mana, and this becomes like a 5/5. It seems good, but it also seems really tough to set up. So again, role player, but adventure payoff. So I'll give it 1.5. You'll probably play it most of the time. Again, in these adventure decks, it just goes in. But Insatiable Appetite is not great. If you're just using it as a combat trick, I want to like this a little bit more. 2 mana giant growths aren't usually great, to me at least. And sacrificing a food, I can just think of like a million things I'd rather sacrifice food for. Now if you can just kill them, just get through with like 2 guys, give one of them +5/+5. Why can't I say it? +5/+5, and just end the game. Like, yeah, that's really good. But those situations are going to be like few and far between. So I'm just going to give the card like a 1. Playable in particularly aggressive food decks, but the food deck doesn't look really aggressive, so the card's kind of defeats its own purpose. But anyway, Marleaf Rider is a 2 mana 3/1, and sacrifice food, and it kind of acts like removal. Like, that's how I like to look at this card. It's like a 2 mana removal spell if you have a food. Like that 3 toughness guy has to block Marleaf Rider this turn. You basically paid 2 mana for a removal spell. I'll take that, but it's also a removal spell on a body, kind of. You know, like if you want to look at it sideways, you can squint really hard and make a removal spell on a body out of this, but and a knight too, for that matter. I mean, it's worth like a tenth of a point in this format, right? So I'll give this a 2. You know, well, I give it a 1.5. I'll give it a 1.5. Very solid card, and yet another 2 mana 3/1. So again, just a quick pro tip: be very careful about 3 toughness creatures in this format at like 3 and 4 mana, because almost every color has like a 2 mana 3/1, right? Green and red and white all have them. So just keep that in the back of your mind. I think it's going to be a very important thing to remember. But in any case, I'll give the card a 2. I think I will, because if you do have food, it's an easy 2. But if you don't, it's probably just like a 1. So let's actually put those scores together. Come back to 1.5. We made it. But anyway, Outmuscle is effectively a better Hunt the Weak, or at least, was Hunt the Weak instant speed? I think it might have been, but this is at least right up there with Hunt the Weak, and Hunt the Weak is a very playable sealed card. So at Common, I expect this to see a fair amount of play, and I can't get enough of this art. I don't know what, like, was it 2 sets ago? Or no, it was in like a Tarkir set, I think. But anyway, it was like Savage Punch, where like a bear was just getting punched in the face. And I remember when that card came out, everyone was like, oh, isn't that hilarious? And like, the same thing happened with Outmuscle. This card was translated as Bear Suplex for the first like week that it was out, because it was in another language. And everyone was just like, ho, 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 look, that's hilarious. But like, why? Like, honestly, like, poor bear. Like, I actually kind of wonder if it's somehow the same bear that got punched in the face on Tarkir a few years ago. But anyway, enough about the ridiculous art and flavor on the card. It's just very playable, even at 4 mana, especially if you can make the creature get indestructible. It's a very, very good card. So, you know, you kill something and you swing in with your indestructible guy. That's so good. So I'll give the card a 2.5. I don't think it's as good as most like playable removal, but it's still a card you will play in your green deck. So especially if you have the creatures to enable it. Return to Nature is sideboard tech, half a point. Rosethorn Acolyte is probably okay. The adventure half of this is more or less useless. This can fix your mana. You might use it for that some of the time, so I won't say useless. You know, if you're in like mono green splash white or red, sometimes you'll cast the adventure half just to cast a red card out of your hand. And it's not like it costs you a card, because you still have a creature to play, right? So, and that creature fixes your mana and ramps you. So I think this might be actually a really good green common, and I'll give it a 2.5. I'd probably play this. I'd probably play this in most green decks. Now, Rosethorn Halberd, I think it's kind of getting a bad rap. This isn't Rancor, but it's like the closest thing we're going to get, right? Like, it's basically just a 1 mana plus 2/+1 enchantment, an aura, that if the creature does die, you don't lose your aura. You know, if you have 5 mana later on in the game and nothing better to do, you know, you draw dead for the turn or something, just throw it on a guy. You know, why not? You know, it seems worth 1 slot in my sealed deck most of the time, and I'll give this card a 1.5. Now, Sporecap Spider, people are sleeping on this, y'all. This card looks really, really good to me. And I know that it's just like 3 mana, 1/5 reach, ho-hum, stats, who cares? But like, first of all, 5 toughness for 3 mana is good. Like, that's good, but given it reach, this blocks nearly every flyer in the entire set and lives to tell the tale. Just completely invalidates like Mazes of Ith, a flyer. You know, even like 4, 5, and 6 mana flyers in the set, this can invalidate. And I really like that. You know, it can even block on the ground when you need it to. 5 toughness is more than enough to block almost any important creature in this entire environment. And for 3 mana, that seems like a really good rate to me. So I'll give this card like a 2. Like, I think it's a little bit better than 1.5, but Tall as a Beanstalk doesn't look green. You know, it's an aura, so you got to worry about it. But it does it infers the biggest bonus of any aura in the entire set, except for maybe all the glitters. So I mean, maybe, but I'm so wary of auras. I never like them in limited, so I'll just give the card a 1. 2 Unveiled Treefolk. That's like the 3rd time I've said Treevolk. I'm talking about this card, but 2 Unveiled Treefolk. Because there's a V in the word before it. I see what you're trying to do to me, linguistics. But anyway, Treefolk is 6 mana for a 6/5, which is okay. It's a fine body most of the time anyway. It's one of the biggest creatures, especially at this rarity, in the entire set. And +2/+1, 2/+1/+1 counters is at least okay. It's not great, but at least it's fine, right? So, like, I think this is one of those, again, like bread and butter commons in the set that you'll play at least 1 copy of in your green decks. So I'll give it a 2. because I think that these adventure cards are just always going to be better than they look. So, but Wildwood Tracker is not great. It's not really great. So I'll give this card like a 1. Yeah, we'll give it a 1. And then Wolf's Quarry cost way too much mana. It just costs so much mana. You're putting a bunch of bodies on the battlefield, and you're getting food tokens when they do die. So I'll give it like a solid 1, but 6 mana is way too much for this. But here we are at the artifacts here, y'all. We're rounding the corner. We're almost there. I'll skip Sorcerer's Spyglass because nobody cares. That card gets a 0.5, maybe a 0. We'll give it a half a point. You might side it in against like Planeswalkers, but I doubt it. Stone Coil Serpent. That's so difficult for me to say, y'all. Stone Coil Serpent is just I guess the way my mouth is shaped. I have no idea why, but Stone Coil Serpent. See, I can't do it. Stone Coil is crazy. That's what I've been trying to get to here. This is just an unbelievable card, and I'll give it like a 4, and yeah, I'll give it a 4. Because this will be good, like, no matter when you play it, right? Like, if you play it as a 3-mana 3/3, it's very good. Even if you play it as a 2-mana 2/2, it's a playable card, but, you know, when you play it as like a 6-mana 6/6, it's probably going to win you the game most of the time. Like, I think this is very close to a bomb. And, yeah, I'll give it a 4. I think it's just, it goes in like every single sealed deck. Why would you not play it? So, definitely play this. We've already gone over some of these, like Glass Casket, but Arcanist Owl is one of the better in this cycle for constructed play. As far as sealed play goes, it's one of the best in this cycle, too. They're all playable in sealed, but a 4-mana 3/3 flyer is good enough stats on its own. But when this nabs you one of the many artifacts or enchantments in the set as card advantage, then yeah, I mean, it kind of draws you a card when it enters the battlefield some of the time. And that's good. But even if you whiff on it, like, yeah, 4-mana 3/3 flyer, screw it. That's fine, kid. So that seems pretty good to me. I'll give the card a 3, just out of hand. Steelclaw Lance, pretty decent, actually. You know, 2 mana for +2/+2. If you equip it to a knight, just costing 1 is really good. But even equipping it for 3 is just okay. But in a knight's deck, this is very close to like a Bone Splitter. That's so good. Plus, you get the toughness bonus, unlike Bone Splitter, and that's insane in limited. So I don't think this pushes the knight's deck too much, you know, especially considering it's black-red, and those aren't always going to be the knight colors in your sealed deck, but it's still a pretty good bonus, and I'd much rather play this than an Aura, so I'll give this card at least a 1.5. I think this is actually low-key really good, and I want to give it a 2, but I'll give it a 1.5. Inquisitive Puppet, not great in this format, although, you know, 1 mana for a 0/2 scry 1 is at least okay. And being able to make a human is something, but it's just not that impactful in like any way. The best thing I can say about this, for the most part, is that it's an artifact for artifact synergies. So I'll give it a 1. Clockwork Servant, if you can hit the Adamant, is a very good Magic card. It just is, you know, 3 mana 2/3, not much to write home about, but any deck can play it, and it draws you a card when it ETBs. If you Adamant it, which it just really shouldn't be that hard. Even if you cast this on turn 4, 2/2 that draws you a card is still at least playable on turn 4, but especially if you can hit it on turn 3, it's a great card. So I'm going to give this a 2. I don't think it's like the best card in the world or anything, and I just spent some time hyping it up where you thought it might be like a 2.5, but I don't think it's that impactful necessarily. But I will say, draw a card on a body, at least a relatively stout body too, is a pretty good Magic card, so we'll leave it at 2. Now, Enchanted Carriage, I actually think this is really good. 4 sealed in just about no other format. You know, 5 mana 4/4, it does take 2 to crew it, but it gives you the 2 creatures to crew it. And even if you don't crew it, you still get a couple of bodies. You know, you're kind of getting 3 bodies out of this 1 card for 5 mana. So I think this is probably a little bit better than it looks, and I'll give it a 2 as well. Heraldic Banner. This is my preview card for the season, and it's just fine. I guess it's okay. I've already talked a little bit about how, like, you know, we're playing a lot of like monocolored light splash for another colored decks. So this is probably really good because it's just straight up ramp, and it's going to give most of your creatures the bonus, you know. So I think this is very playable in sealed, but again, not going to necessarily be the best card in your deck, but especially in these aggressive sealed decks. Seems really good, and I'll give it a 2. Do I want to do a 2.5? Do I want to do that? Yeah, well, we'll give it a 2 because 2 is still a pretty good score. Lucky Clover, on the other end. This really needs to be enabled. Absolutely must. But again, 30 adventure cards at lower rarity, you might get a proc or 2 off of this in a game, but it probably isn't worth both the turn off to play it and the slot in your deck. So I'm just going to give this a 1 for now. If you have like 6 to 8 adventure cards in your deck, it might be worth it, but in most cases it's not going to be. Shambling Suit is all right. It's just okay. You know, a 3 mana 1/3 usually that can be like a 3 mana 3/3 in some games is just okay, but it's not going to be more than just okay. So I'll give the card a 1. Sorcerer's Broom could go out of hand, right, if you have the right cards in play, but for the most part, it's not going to get out of hand, and it's just going to be like a curve filler that also sets off artifact synergies. So I'll just give this card a 1 as well. Spinning Wheel. It's like right there with Heraldic Banner, because this is removal. Effectively, like later on in the game, this can function as a Mazavith for a lot of mana for effectively, you know, almost basically 6 mana. You know, this can function as a Mazavith. So I want to like this because I want to play a 3 mana rock anyway in a lot of sealed decks. But I also want to really affect the board with a creature on turn 3. So I'm always kind of torn between these. But one that effectively becomes removal when it's not really a good ramp piece anymore actually looks like it could be impactful to me. So I'm going to give this card a 2 as well. Witch's Oven probably doesn't do much. In sealed, this probably doesn't do hardly anything. And you don't want to sacrifice your guys, even for food tokens. I don't much care for it. So I'm going to give this like a 0.5. Well, a 0? Do I want to give this a 0? I like the card too much to do that to it. Let's give it a half a point. I've already gone over some of these. Yeah, I've already gone over all of these colored artifacts. So let's do Crashing Drawbridge. Just a 2 mana 0/4 that actually makes all of your, you know, creature draws live for the rest of the game. It's a little like Crystal Slipper in that way. Actually kind of like. I don't think it's super impactful. But again, I do like cards that make all of my creature draws into like really impactful cards for the rest of the game that immediately do something, you know, when I play them. So I think the card is at least okay. But in the aggressive decks that might want something like this, at least ostensibly, it's like a 2 mana 0/4, so that's not good, right? So I'm just not really like sure where it actually fits in the world of sealed. But giving your, you know, 6 power flying bomb haste, it seems like a pretty good place to be in some decks. So I'll give it a solid 1. I think that's where it goes. Gingerbread might actually make its way into some decks. You know, this is effectively food. You can tap it and sacrifice it to pay 2 mana, tap it, sacrifice it to gain 3. And it's a food type, so it's literally a food token. That's also a 1 mana 1/1 haste that effectively can't be blocked in most situations. So again, in aggressive decks, this looks like one of those 1 mana 1/1s you'll play, and it does enable Lovestruck Beasts. Lovestruck Beasts can be in love with Gingerbread, which is super cute. But keep that interaction in mind. But for the most part, 1 mana 1/1s, no matter how much text you put on them, aren't that playable in sealed. And even though this one's a little bit better and does enable food strategies, I really can't give it much more than like a 1.5. Golden Egg. Again, it's a food, and both of these last 2 cards have been at the common rarity, and that's going to be important for these food decks. So do keep that in mind. But at the same time, you know, even with, you know, the mana fixing, the life gain, the drawing a card, I mean, the card does a lot of things for a price, but even though the card does a fair amount of things, I don't really want to give it more than a 1. If you're in the food deck, it's like a 1.5 or a 2. You have to play the card, but for the most part, it's just a 1 to me. Hingewalker is... I had somebody point this out in the comments section of a spoiler season video, and I think I agree with them. They said Hingewalker is probably a trap in sealed. You know, because sometimes it's going to be a 3 mana 2/2, and that's like terrible. Like sometimes it's going to be a 3 mana 3/3, but you just can't count on that. Unless your deck is 100% monocolored, you can't count on that. So there's going to be, you know, 20% of games or so. Well, this is a 3 mana 2/2, and that's terrible on turn 3. So I don't know, man. I think this is probably really just like half a point. I don't think it's quite as good as it looks. If you can make it Centaur Courser on turn 4, that's probably at least worth a 1. But this looks a little bit... Ever since I read that comment, I was like, oh, wow, that is correct. So whoever left that comment, good on you. You changed my mind on Hingewalker. I think it might actually be a trap and sealed. You're very likely correct. Now, Jousting Dummy, I like a little bit. You know, 2 mana 2/1, curve filler, night strategies this synergizes with. That's kind of cool. You can pay a lot of mana and make it a little bit more relevant. But at the same time, resounding But it is curve filler, so I'll give it a 1. Now, Locthwain Gargoyle, I have kind of the same problems, you know. A 1 mana 0/3 just doesn't really do much unless you're against a very aggressive deck and you get it in the very early game. And 4 mana is so much. Like, even if you're getting a 3 mana, or excuse me, a 3/3 flyer, 4 mana is so much, especially if you plan on doing this like every turn. That's crazy. So I don't much care for the card unless you're specifically enabling artifact stuff. But even then, I don't really want to give it more than a 1. That's a very baseline card. Prophet of the Peak, on the other hand, 6 mana 5/5 that any deck can play and has upside when it ETBs. I kind of like it. I'll give it a 1.5. This is probably going to show up in a sealed deck of mine every now and again, but not every time. Now, Roving Keep, I don't like at all. 7 mana is basically infinite for most of the time. And the activate ability costs just as much. Sometimes it'll win the game and just attack as a 7/7, trample. It seems good as far as like finishing pieces go, but it's just so much mana. Like, it's so much mana, y'all. So I don't know. I might try out one copy of this in like a ramp deck in sealed, but aside from that, I think it's just a solid 1. Like a lot of these other artifacts in the last few entries. Now, Scalding Cauldron, I'll give this a 1 as well, but this is removal. Like, this is removal. You'll play it in some decks, and in those decks, like in a blue or green deck that doesn't have access to any other removal, this card's like a 2. But in most decks, it's like a 1. So we'll give it that. Now, Signpost Scarecrow, I actually kind of really like this card. 4 mana 2/4 Vigilance are kind of stats that I'll take. But again, in these like really, really aggressively one-color decks that also splash very lightly a second color, this is a key piece, I would imagine, like no matter what colors you get, you can cast this card. And if you need to cast, your secondary color and you don't have any sources of it, for a price, again, you can fix your mana. So I like this. It blocks all day. It can sometimes attack and block in the same turn sequence and fix your mana. It just seems good to me. And kind of like one of the more playable, like common level, and one of the more subtly playable common level artifacts. I'll give this one a 1.5. Now, Weapon Rack is pretty bad. I feel like this card is bad. I mean, 4 mana, and it does affect the battlefield the turn it comes in. It gives a +1/+1 counter to one guy, but I mean, 4 mana for a +1/+1 counter the turn it comes in is not great. And even 4 mana for +3/+3 over the course of a few turns, also just not amazing. But I will say, if there's one like really valuable part of this card, is that you can pick and choose what creatures you put those bonuses on, and that might really, really help in combat in a game of sealed. So I can see a world where this card is actually playable, and I might let a copy sneak into my sealed deck, no more than 1, on pretty much any occasion, no matter how aggressive the deck is. I mean, the card is 4 mana, so even in like your most aggressive decks, it just costs a lot. But I mean, I might try 1 copy, but I really can't give the card more than a 1. All right, y'all, we in it. Gold cards here, or multicolored cards, if you're on Mythic Spoiler. If you put in gold cards, they don't know what you're talking about, but you have to search for multicolored specifically. But let's look at the Royal Scions. Ridiculous card, it's probably won't win you the game by itself in most cases, but drawing an extra card every turn is really good, especially if you have these things that want you to draw 2 cards a turn. It's very good, but the +2/+0 in First Strike and Trample, for that matter, is a very good ability, especially for plussing. That's actually fantastic in sealed, provided you have 1 creature out. So I really like this card, and even though I don't know that it's a bomb, there is enough advantage on this that it's probably going to go a long way towards you winning the game, even though it doesn't win the game by itself. So I'll give the card a solid 3, if not a 3.5. 3.5. We'll give it 3.5. Garrett the Cursed Huntsman is one of the most crazy bombs in the entire set. Not only is this, a way to expand your board heavily, all of a sudden, 2 bodies a turn is just unbelievable, but it also functions as removal, sometimes more than once in a game, draws you cards, just everything about the card. It's tuned for constructed play, but in such a way that it's also maybe the best card in the entire set for sealed play as well. So I'll give this one the stamp of approval. We'll put a 5 on it. I got 5 on it for this card. We'll all the way to 5 town. $5 footlongs. We'll give Garrick a 5. But anyway, let's move on to Oko here, which is a little less impressive than Garrick, but right there with the Royal Scions in my mind. Creating a food token is going to be especially good to enable any of these food deck strategies. I shouldn't have to tell you that, but this also kind of has removal on it a little bit, and straight up removal, where you just steal the creature entirely from your opponent, provided it's small enough. So this card looks like it could take over a game by itself, and is probably a little bit more of a bomb than the Royal Scions, although they probably do constitute bombs at the end of the day. I'll give this a 3.5 too. It's right there with Rowan Kenrith and Will Kenrith. That's their names. But anyway, Outlaw's Merriment, another ridiculous bomb. You might notice getting a free creature every single turn in limited is just good. It's just good. It's a good thing to be able to do. Sometimes you'll get a big guy, sometimes you'll get a small guy. It really doesn't matter. You know, you're getting a guy every turn, no matter what you actually drew off the top of your library. And that is the stuff of dreams. So I'll give this card a 4.5. I think it really is that good. Really that good in sealed. If nowhere else, I'm not sure the card goes anywhere in constructed, although there's an argument for it. I think this card is mostly like a ridiculous sealed bomb, and that's why it's mythic. Now, Danse of the Valse is also potentially a bomb, but very, very difficult to enable. And if you want to enable it fully, it costs like infinite mana. So I'm going to give this a 0.5 of a point. But there's going to be some situations where, like, you do something insane with it, and the entire card shop erupts because, like, you're the last match in that round that hasn't finished yet because you're playing Dance the Mance, so you're probably doing something weird and playing a long game deck. You know, so, I mean, maybe you could be the one person to make it work, but I'm going to give this card a 0.5 a point. I really don't think it's meant for sealed play. Doom Foretold, on the other hand, is nuts. This is going to be really, really annoying, both for you and your opponent, for what that's worth. But at the same time, this is it's probably just dumb, right? Like it's basically a drop of honey in a way that just makes them get rid of something every turn, and I guess you have to as well. But even symmetrical, I really like this ability, so I like this a good bit. But at the same time, it's not like the biggest bomb in the world. I'll give it a 3.5. That said, though, Escape to the Wilds, I don't like this as much as I want to. I don't, you know. Even in Gruul, I think this is probably at least playable. It makes its way into your deck as a card advantage piece. But at the same time, like, it could be better, right? Like, I'll give this a 2 because I want it to be better. Do something better. But it is, again, it's playable, so I'll give it a 2. That kind of card advantage is really nice, especially in a color that doesn't get it very often. So I'm probably under-evaluating this, but I'm just not impressed. If I spend 5 mana in Gruul colors, I want to affect the board right then and there, and the card just doesn't really do that. But Faber or Elder, on the other hand, looks just absolutely ludicrous. You know, 3 mana for a 2/2 off the rip isn't the best thing in the world, but at least it's got Vigilance, and it taps for 2 mana. Which is what I'm most interested in this card. You know, these Selesnya decks that want to ramp a little bit, especially decks that play more, you know, than 2 colors. If you actually put those together in the sealed environment, then having a 3/3 that taps for 3 colors seems very good for your investment. So the more colors you play, the better this is. But it looks like we're in a limited environment where you're not playing too many colors, to be honest. So, you know, even if you just play Selesnya, the card is probably playable, but definitely not jacked or anything. You know, it's kind of a Gyre Engineer that's like a little bit better. So, but Gyre Engineer was playable in that sealed environment, so I got to give this at least a 2. That said, let's move on to Lochmere Serpent, which is going to win a lot of blue-black players, a lot of games in sealed. I got to give this at least a 3. You know, if I see this in my third pack, it pretty much instantly puts me in blue and black. 6 mana seems like a lot, but it's actually really aggressively costed for what you're getting on this card. It's really difficult to actually take care of forever. You know, your opponent's probably only going to have 5 cards in their graveyard like once in a game of sealed, but once is all you really need. You know, bring this card back once, you're probably set for life. So, it's, you know, they can't block it a couple of turns in the row. They just lose the game. It's just one of the biggest bombs you could hope for in blue-black. So I got to give the card a solid 4. I really should do that. Stormfist Crusader, on the other hand, probably good, especially in these really uber-aggressive decks. The card looks fantastic. You don't necessarily want your opponent to draw a card every turn, but you also get to as well. So, provided that you have the mana base to cast this on turn 2, 3, whatever, then, yeah, so it's probably ridiculous, but the fact that it's a symmetrical effect really does set the card back a good bit for me, so I'll give it a 2.5 here. Now, what have we not talked about? We talked about Arcanist, Al. Yeah, because it's an artifact. That makes sense. Now, Covetous Urge, on the other hand, I want to like this, but it doesn't actually affect the board for 4 mana. Not immediately or anything, but sometimes this is going to get the giant bomb out of your opponent's hand, and just make it your own. You know, like, nice bomb. I think I'll take it. Like, it seems good. That seems pretty good, right? But most of the time, I don't think this card's going to be as impactful as you want it to be. That said, I'll still give it like a 1.5. I'd play the card. I'd at least try the card. And this is another one where I worry that I'm like really under-evaluating it here. But for the most part, I don't think this card is going to be as good as you want it to be. But who knows? This is another one where like I really hope that I haven't screwed up the evaluation. I kind of like the card in Constructed, although again, 4 mana to not affect the board is so much. And if anything keeps it from seeing standard play, it's probably that. But at the same time, like the the fail case on this is terrible, but you know, the win case, the success case on it is so good that I'd be really tempted to play it in sealed. But moving on to Deathless Knight, this is really good. This is one of the best, you know, 4 mana hybrid color cards in the entire set, because it's not going to be too hard to gain life, period, in this set. But you got all this food running around, so you might be enabling something entirely different on your battlefield with food by sacrificing a food token or something. But you also get the tertiary effect of getting Deathless Knight back from your hand, back from your graveyard to your hand. You know, these recursive creatures like this, especially with a decent power, I'm not that worried about the 2 toughness on this because, again, it's recursive. Although I will say the 2 toughness makes it need to be recursive. But again, I'm not that worried about it, especially since they threw the haste on. Pretty aggressively costed for the most part. And if you can get it back just once in a game, it's probably done its job. You know, again, recursive creatures are just the bomb bib dizzle in these sealed environments. So I got to give this at least a 3.5. Drawn in the Lock, probably super hard to enable, to be honest. I just don't know about this one, you guys. Yeah, it's removal, and you play removal, but I can't give it a 3 like I do most removal. I'll give it like a 2 or even a 1.5, because this won't be really good until the late game. That said, in the late game, it's just 100% removal, so it's very good, but it's not going to be good until you get to that point. Now, Elite Headhunter, this is pretty decent too in sealed and like literally nowhere else. But even in sealed, it's a 4 mana 2/3. Those are bad stats. But at the same time, this enables like sacrifice shenanigans and is repeatable removal on a stick. So it's just good. If nothing else for that last, for the activated ability on it, it's a good magic card in sealed because it'll kill like 2 creatures a game, and that's crazy. So I don't care how much it costs to activate. Doesn't matter. Yeah, I know you have to sometimes kill one of your own guys, so it's kind of a symmetrical effect in that way, but it still doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. You know, this can kill a creature or 2 a game and be a decent threat in and of its own. So even though it's not the best card in this cycle, I'll still give it a 2. I think it shows up in your Rakdos or mono red or mono black decks. So that's one thing I should say about these hybrid mana cards, is that I always like these every time I see them. Hybrid mana is one of my favorite things in all of Magic, for a number of reasons. But in the sealed environment, it sort of helps enable these, you know, monocolored decks that you want to play if you want to hit adamant bonuses and stuff. You know, there's not too many dual lands in this set, or mana fixing at all, really. I mean, there's some, but not that much. So these hybrid symbol cost cards really serve multiple functions in that they help enable monocolored decks too. So it's cool. You know, like Fireborn Knight, you can play mono red or mono white. It's a fine card. You know, you're effectively getting a 4/3 double strike if you don't pump it ever, or if you don't have Anthem effects or anything like that. You know, you don't put an aura on it, for instance. It's just a 4/3 for, 4, which is not the best stats in the world, but the fact that it has effectively first strike the first time it hits really helps push this card. And if you do have, the open mana to pump it, then you can kind of have like a 6-power guy. So that seems really, really good to me. And again, this isn't the best of the cycle. It's still a solid like 2 or 2.5. I'll say 2. Because this just goes in your deck, but it's never going to be the best card in your deck. Hopefully. If it is, probably drop. Anyway, let's move on to Grumgully. It's got to be my favorite name to say in the entire set. Grumgully is a 3 mana 3/3, so he's good. It's good. And if you have a bunch of non-humans, he's, again, a sort of metallic mimic type card. So this is another thing that I just love. I forgot the name of it, but like the 3 mana 2/2 flyer in white, that when all your adventure guys come into play, they get a +1/+1 counter. It's kind of like that, but even easier to enable, given that you have a bunch of non-humans. So the power toughness is higher too. It loses a good keyword ability, but still, it's a fine rate for what you're actually getting here. And if this ends up bringing a total of 5, 6, 7 power onto the battlefield for your 3 mana investment, it's just one of the best cards in your deck. So I got to give the card like a 3. I just think it's liable to put you in Gruul if you aren't in Gruul yet. It doesn't automatically do so, but it's liable to tempt you. On Probable Alliance, again, in sealed, I think it's really, really difficult to enable this draw your second card each turn, but this one at least helps you do it, provided that you have enough mana. And 6 mana is a super high rate to activate the card, but getting a loot and a 1/1 flyer it's not worth 6 mana, but it's something to do with your mana. If it's late in the game and you drew something not super impactful, this at least gets you a body on the battlefield every turn, And you get to kind of, instead of you pitch that crappy card that you drew. So, I don't know. It's probably a really, really good card. And the best of this cycle of stuff that cares about your second card each turn. It's the best of that cycle for sealed play. And again, I can see this just wreaking havoc in the late game. So it's probably worth it, but not quite bomb territory or anything. I'll give it a 2.5. Go. Now, Inspiring Veteran really requires that you have Knights out, but if you do, it's a really good card. It's like a 2.5 if you have Knights, But even if you don't, it's a 2-mana 2/2, so I'll give it like a 1.5. But for the most, 1. But if you have Knights, the card just becomes insane. So we'll give it a 2 at least. Now, yeah, I'll stick with 2, provided that you have some Knights. It's a very good card. Now, Lock Dragon. Again, not the best of this cycle by any stretch, but one of. To me, again, this goes in mono blue or mono red, or is it? And in mono blue or mono red, I think this looks like a pretty good card, especially like a mono red deck that's looking for, to fix its hand, we'll say. Or if it draws crappy, like a land or something it doesn't want. You can just attack and then pitch that card. Draw a new one. That seems really good to me. And you'll play Snapping Drake stats anyway. 4-mana 3/2 flyer, that's fine stats. And this one does even more than that. It gets a cool ETB trigger and attacks trigger. So I think it's really a kind of a push card for sealed. And I'd play every copy I got in, any of the colors that can play it. So I really like this. Although if you're playing like blue-white or red-green, I probably wouldn't want this card. Same thing with Fireborn Knight. If I'm playing red-black or, white-green, I probably don't want the card as much. But, in the decks that can really cast the card, efficiently, these are all really, really good. Mara Leaf Pixie is a 2-mana 2/2 flying, and that's good stats. Like, it's fine, but it also ramps. So I really like this card, and I'll give it a 2.5 because a 2-mana 2/2 flying I'll play every day, and a 2-mana guy that ramps for 2 different colors, I'll probably play that every day too. Slap them together, I love it. I'll give it at least a 2. Okame Ranger is the Selesnya hybrid mana cost thing, and it's pretty decent, provided that you have a fairly wide body, or a fairly wide board, which it creates in and of itself. You go bring back on turn 4, and then turn 5, you play your Ranger. Turn 6, you can start tapping it to actually give all your dudes +1/+1. So, I don't know, the card looks okay. 4-mana 2/2s, I'm a little bit wary of, but the fact that this is 3 bodies on 1 card, I can get over it. Let me put it that way. I think this is actually one of the cooler cards in the cycle for sealed specifically, so I'll give it a 2.5. Rampart Smasher is stats. I mean, it's again, how many Knights? 35 Knights at common and uncommon. So, I mean, this is going to just smash through a bunch of stuff. There's going to be occasions where your opponent literally just doesn't have anything but Knights on the battlefield. And there's going to be other occasions where they have 2 Knights and another creature, and they could double or triple block if they could block with their Knights, but they can't. So they block with their 1 creature that's smaller than this. So I could see this being really good, and a 4-mana 5/5 is good on its own. Those are really, really desirable stats. So I like this card a lot, and I think it's one of the best in the cycle for sealed play. I'm going to go ahead and give this a 2.5 as well, which, remember, is very playable. Resolute Rider, though, I want to like this so much. It's the Orzhov one, so that's probably why I want to like it. I'm an Orzhov kid, but 4/2, not the best stats, but it can game indestructible. That said, it's probably not going to gain indestructible until the turn after it comes into play, so your opponent kind of has 1 turn to deal with it. And if they have the removal spell, you're SOL, So I don't like it for that reason, but if you can untap with this card in play, then it just gets much, much better. Lifelink on a 4-power guy can swing the game in your favor like crazy. If you play this on turn 4 and then play a land turn 5, you don't even have to play anything else. You just get a lifelink indestructible guy and swing in with it. And that seems really, really good. So I really want to like this card, but the 2 toughness comes... It does dampen things a bit, even with the indestructibility, because you're not always going to have the mana. 3 mana is a lot. That's a fairly high activation cost. But that said, if you can activate either one of the abilities, the card just becomes insane already. Even if you trade in combat, let's say you don't have the 3 mana to make it indestructible, but you block a 4 toughness creature and give it the lifelink, kill their 4 toughness guy, you might lose your Resolute Rider, but you kill their guy, you gain 4 life. That's good. So, I don't know. I do like the card. It also enables Knight stuff, so you got to factor that in one way or the other. I'll give this one a 2.5 as well, because I just really like this whole cycle. But these 3 on the bottom, I think, are just some of the best. Plus the Golgari one, all of these are just really good. But And there's another one on this page that's just unbelievable too. But moving over to Savvy Hunter, 2 foods is a lot. Like 2 foods is so much, but it does create food tokens by itself, and it's 3 mana 3/3, so it's like worth playing. That's a fine stat line for the cost, especially in sealed. So I'll give this card like a 2. But in decks that can enable food, the card's like a 3. Like, it's one of the best cards in the entire deck. Because sacrificing 2 foods to draw a card is just, that's very good. That's very good if you've got the food. But 2 foods is a very steep cost in sealed, where, like, I'm a little bit worried about stuff that you have to sacrifice 1 food. So 2 foods is a lot. That's a hungry lady right there. But if you can draw like 1 card a game off of your 3 mana 3/3, that seems pretty good to me. But let's move on to Shine Chaser, which I actually don't like that much. If you have one of these things in play, an artifact or enchantment, it's a 3 mana 2/2 flying vigilance, and that's very good. That's good. That's Windrake plus vigilance. That's good. If you have both in play, 3 mana 3/3 flyer, but that is not going to happen very often in sealed. I mean, you just can't. You can try and plan for it, but your card pool is small. You have no control over what cards you open up, and even then, you don't get to play like 4 of all of your favorite artifacts and enchantments. It's not gonna be very often that this gets the full bonus. You know, and a lot of times it might just be a 3 mana 1/1, which I don't like, you know, but if you can make it a 3 mana 2/2 vigilance, it's better than a Windrake, and I'll play a Windrake, so I'll give the card a 2. Now, Thunderous Snapper is a lot of people's pick for best card in this cycle. Just a 4 mana 4/4 is fine stats, and you're bound to cast a 5 mana spell or more on the next turn in most games of sealed. So, you know, a 4 mana 4/4 that draws you a card is just good. Like that's good. But if it draws you 2 cards, it's freaking unbelievable. You know, it somehow draws you 3 cards. It's easily the best card in your deck. So I just love how big of a threat it is. I love the ability to draw cards sometimes, but in some games you're not even going to draw a card off of it. That said, when you do, the card is just unbelievable. I love this cycle, if you can't tell, and I'll give this one a 2.5. I'm really tempted to give it a 3, but I'll give it a 2.5 with the caveat and the reminder that 2.5 is a more than playable card in sealed. That's very good. But moving on to Wandermare, it's another 3 mana 3/3 stat line. A lot of that in this set, if you haven't noticed. So, playable in sealed, but keep in mind a little less so than usual because there's so many freaking 3 mana 3/3s. But in any case, this one can get bigger. You know, on the next turn you cast something with an adventure, and suddenly it's a 4 mana or 4 power guy. So that's seems good. If you can cast like 2 adventures in the same game, you got a 5/5 for your 3 mana investment. Like, it all seems really good, and it doesn't seem too hard to enable either. So this is just, I wish it were common. It's uncommon, but it is one of those bread and butter uncommons for the Selesnya adventure deck that probably can collect like 5 or 6 different cards with adventures pretty easily, even in its sealed pool. And at that point, a card like this is just crazy. So I really like Wandermare, and I'll give it a 2.5 as well, even though I'm tempted to give it a 2. So there's going to be some games where you never even cast an adventure, you know what I mean? Like, you never cast a creature spell with an adventure. By the way, there has been some confusion on that. You don't get a +1/+1 counter. You don't get the proc on stuff like this when you cast the adventure half. Just when you cast the creature half. So do keep that in mind. But if this ever gets up to like a 4/4, which is literally just casting 1 adventure creature a game, that's pretty good. So I'll give this card a 2.5. Wintermore Commander, I don't actually like that much, but best thing about this card is Death Touch. That is seriously the best piece of text on the card. You know, it takes like 3 other nights to make this decent, you know. I guess the 2 mana 2/3 would be good if you had 2 other nights out. Like, that'd be okay, but for the most part, I want this to have 4 toughness, and that requires so many nights in sealed. Like, having 3 other nights out in sealed is just, it's really hard to guarantee. But that said, it's always going to be a 2 mana 2/1 Death Touch, and that's playable stats. That is playable stats. I'll give the card a 2. But let's bring it home with what few lands are in the set here. Starting with Castle Ardenvale. Really, I mean, I'm just covering the lands for posterity because all of these lands are insanely playable and limited. Like, I might as well just give all of these lands like a 3.5 or something. Like, especially these, you know, if you're able to play mostly monocolored decks, like both of these cycles, the rare and common cycle, are just like, you might as well, right? Like, there's no reason not to play them. So I'll just go ahead and say like all of these get at least a 3, if not a 3.5, because you're just gonna play them all. Why would you not play any of these if you ran across them and you were in the color, you know? None of these, I'll make that caveat, I don't think like any of these lands put you in a color. Let me get Witch's Cottage. I'm not like, oh, I'm playing black now, you know? If I get Castle Vantress, I'm like, oh, I gotta play blue. It's not necessarily like that. Although we'll say Castle Locthwain might make me really want to play black. And same thing with Ardenvale. Like, I might really want to play white if I got Ardenvale, but I'm not sure that any of these like really put me in the color. Although, I guess I'll order these for sealed play. I think from best to worst, it's like Castle Ardenvale, Castle Locthwain, Castle Embereth, Castle Vantress, Castle Garenbrig. Although I might be undervaluing Vantress, because Vantress can just put another removal spell back on top of your library, get double duty out of that removal spell. That seems really good, but all of these are really good. All of these are very good. And then, let's see, let's rate these. Common lands for sealed play, if we possibly can. This will be pretty slapdash, but let's see. I think it goes Witch's Cottage. Well... I got Vantress mixed up with Sanctuary. Sanctuary is the one that can put a removal spell back on top of your library. Vantress is just okay. So it's probably Witch's Cottage, Mystic Sanctuary, Dwarven Mine, Gingerbread Cabin, then Idyllic Grange. I think that's the way I'd rate these. But again, they're all, you might as well play them, right? You just do it. So. And then I guess these two, Fabled Passage is good. You just play it. It's like a 3. You play the card. It's actually probably like a 4. And then Tournament Grounds, I'm not actually sure. It's 248 of 269, so it is in the main set. Okay, yeah, you play that in your Knights deck if you get it. I thought this might just be in Brawl decks, but no, it's in the main set. But yeah, that is, I think we did it. Woo, we did it. I don't know how long this has gone on. Let's take a quick look in Audacity. Oh boy, that's a long video. But anyway, I hope you stuck through for all of this. We actually made it through all the cards, everybody. It was a very long video, but we did it. And if you're still here, I applaud you. I applaud you for staying on your grind. It was a slog. This is longer than most podcasts. This is like longer than a Lord of the Rings movie. So I'm right there with it. So good job. You did it. Even if it took installments, you did it. So like the content if you enjoyed the content. If you listened to it this far, I'm pretty sure you liked it. So like the content, hit the thumbs up button, hit the subscribe button, go over to Patreon if you want to reward hard work like this. All I ask is $1 a month. You get to vote on what Throne of Eldraine stuff you want to see next, and I am worth a damn dollar because I do stuff like this for you. And you can check out TCG Player, first link in the description, if you want to pre-order any of this buttery goodness that you saw in the video today. But aside from that, I'm pretty sure I'm done. I'm not going to waste your time any longer. I'm Deb from The Place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind.